Most Space Marine chapters serve the Emperor. The Black Templars worship him. This distinction is not cosmetic. It is not a difference of vocabulary between warriors who perform the same function with the same understanding of what they are doing. It is a difference that reaches all the way down through doctrine and culture and institutional identity to the foundations of what these warriors believe they are for. And the difference has shaped the Black Templars into something that no other chapter in the Adeptus Astartes resembles. They are crusaders. Not in the metaphorical sense that some chapters use the word. The language of the crusade adopted for a campaign, worn for a season, set aside when the campaign ends, and the chapter returns to its fortress monastery to replenish and rest. The Black Templars are crusaders in the literal, permanent, 10,000-year sense. They have been on crusade since the day they were founded. They have not stopped. They do not intend to stop. The crusade is not something the Black Templars do. It is what the Black Templars are. And the distinction between doing and being is the heart of everything about them. They have no homeworld. Other chapters maintain fortress monasteries on the worlds that raised them, anchor themselves to a place, develop the specific relationship between warrior and terrain that a permanent home produces. The Black Templars' home is a warship. The Eternal Crusader, their flagship, their monastery, their reliquary, moves through the void carrying the heart of the chapter from war to war, and the wars do not end because the crusade does not end. And the crusade does not end because the oath that began it was sworn without a terminus. 10,000 years. That is how long the Black Templars have been fighting without pause, without rest, without the interval between campaigns that every other chapter uses to rebuild and reflect and prepare for what comes next. The Black Templars prepare for what comes next while they are still finishing what came before. They fight now, and they fought yesterday, and they will fight tomorrow. And the distance between those fights is the time it takes to reload and pray. They are the largest chapter in the Adeptus Astartes. This is not officially acknowledged, because the official number would create problems. The Codex Astartes prescribes a chapter strength of 1,000 warriors, and the Black Templars maintain a polite fiction about compliance that the Inquisition has never chosen to challenge directly. The actual number, known, it is said, only to the High Marshal himself, is rumored to approach 6,000. The Templars distribute this strength across multiple simultaneous crusade fleets, each operating independently under its own marshal, each prosecuting its own campaign in its own region of the galaxy, and the decentralization makes the true number difficult to count and more difficult to confront. It is the most successful, sustained defiance of the Codex Astartes in 10,000 years of Imperial history, and it has been sustained because the Black Templars fight so effectively and so constantly and in so many places at once that the Imperium has never been able to afford to make them stop. This is their story. A chapter born from the greatest warrior of the greatest legion at the worst moment in the Imperium's history, forged in a vow that was never meant to expire, kept burning across 10 millennia by a faith so absolute that it frightens even the institutions that share it. It is a story of war without end, of devotion beyond reason, of warriors who carry the Emperor's name into battle as a battle cry, and who mean it, who genuinely, completely, without reservation believe that the God they serve hears them when they scream his name, and that the war they fight is holy. In a galaxy full of warriors who fight because they were made to fight, The Black Templars fight because they believe they were made to fight for God. And the God they serve has never told them to stop. To understand the Black Templars, you begin with Sigismund. Because Sigismund is where it all begins, and everything that the chapter has become for 10,000 years is a reflection of the man who made it. Sigismund was the first captain of the Imperial Fists during the Great Crusade, the most senior line officer of the legion that Rogel Dawn had built into the Emperor's most trusted defenders. He was also, by general consensus across the legions, the finest swordsman in the entire Adeptus Astartes. Not one of the finest. Not among the top echelon. The finest. Warriors from every legion who had seen him fight or fought beside him, or been foolish enough to face him in training bouts, described the same thing. A quality of combat that went past mere skill into something closer to an expression of physical inevitability. When Sigismund drew his blade, the fight was already decided. Everything that followed was the universe catching up to the conclusion. He was born on Terra, not in a palace or a military encampment, but in the drift camps of the Ionis Plateau, the margins, the edges, the places where the consolidation of the Emperor's unification had not yet smoothed the rough ground. He came from nothing, and what nothing produced was a warrior of absolute, uncompromising clarity. Sigismund did not deal in ambiguity. He did not navigate the political complexities that occupied some of his peers with any particular grace. He understood one thing completely: the fight. The blade in the hand, the enemy before him. The commitment to closing the distance between those two facts as efficiently and as violently as possible. Rogel Dawn recognized what he had in Sigismund early and elevated him accordingly. The first captain served as his Primarch's right hand, the warrior Dawn trusted with the most demanding operational tasks. The officer whose presence on a battlefield meant that Dawn had judged the situation important enough to send the best he had. And Sigismund repaid that trust with a record of combat that the 7 legions' already distinguished roster could not match. But the heresy was coming, and the heresy would change Sigismund, and what it changed him into would change the Imperium. When the treachery of Horus became known, when the galaxy tore itself apart, and the legions that had been brothers became enemies, and the war that should never have happened became the defining event of human history, Rogel Dawn received the task of defending Terra. The Imperial Fists, the Praetorians of Terra, the legion whose purpose had always been the protection of the Emperor's seat. They would hold the walls. They would man the defenses. They would be the foundation on which the throne world's survival rested. And Dawn appointed Sigismund to a role that had not existed before. The Emperor's Champion. The title carried a weight that exceeded its formal authority. The Emperor's Champion was not simply the best fighter given a mandate to fight. He was a symbol, the physical embodiment of humanity's defiance. The warrior who stood at the point of the greatest danger and fought the enemy's most powerful champions, not because he was ordered to, but because the role demanded it and he was the only one capable of filling it. The Emperor's Champion fought the duels that could not be lost, faced the enemies that could not be survived, and by his presence told the defenders of Terra that the Emperor's will was still being expressed through blade and fury. Sigismund accepted the role and became something more than the best swordsman in the legions. He became the first of a line that would extend, unbroken, since the founding. During the Siege of Terra, Sigismund fought with a ferocity that the histories struggle to convey without descending into the language of mythology. He sought out the traitor legion's champions, and he killed them. One after another, the most dangerous warriors that the forces of chaos could field against the Emperor's walls met Sigismund and died. His kill count during the siege is not recorded with precision because the chroniclers could not keep up with it. What is recorded is the effect. The traitor forces learned very quickly that wherever the black-clad swordsman appeared, their champions died. They began to avoid the sections of the wall where he fought. The champion of the Emperor cleared ground not by holding it in the conventional sense, but by making the cost of contesting it so extreme that the enemy redirected its assault elsewhere. The siege ended. The Emperor was broken on the Golden Throne. The traitors fled, and the Imperium, shattered and grieving, began the long process of reorganization that would determine what it became in the millennia ahead. Robert Guillemon's Codex Astartes prescribed the breaking of the legions into chapters of 1,000 warriors each. The logic was sound. The heresy had demonstrated what a legion-sized force could do when it turned, and the Imperium could not afford to give any single commander that kind of power again. The legions would be divided. The power would be distributed. The chapters would serve the Emperor individually, unable to threaten the whole even if one of them went wrong. The Imperial Fists complied, and from the breaking of the 7 Legion, among the successor chapters that emerged was one that carried Sigismund's name and Sigismund's oath, and Sigismund's uncompromising vision of what service to the Emperor meant. Sigismund became the first High Marshal of the Black Templars, and as High Marshal, he swore the oath that would define the chapter for its entire existence, that the Black Templars would never stop fighting, that the crusade they embarked upon would have no endpoint, no return to rest, no interval of peace, that the enemies of the Emperor would be pursued and destroyed without pause, without mercy, without the kind of strategic patience that other chapters could afford, because the Black Templars did not believe patience was what the Emperor required. The Emperor required war, permanent, total, unrelenting war against everything that stood between humanity and his vision for the galaxy. Sigismund had looked at the cost of the heresy and concluded that the only acceptable response was to ensure that no enemy of the Emperor ever felt safe again. Every High Marshal since has renewed the oath, 10,000 years of it. The longest crusade in the history of the Adeptus Astartes, begun by the greatest swordsman the Imperium ever produced, sustained by the faith he ignited in every warrior who carried his gene seed and his purpose. Sigismund himself did not survive to see the crusade become what it became. He met Abaddon the Despoiler, the War Master's own champion, the Lord of the Black Legion in the First Battle of Cadia, when the traitor forces first emerged from the Eye of Terror to test the Imperium's defenses. Sigismund was old by then, his body carrying centuries of unbroken war. But his will was undimmed, and his blade was still the deadliest thing in any room it entered. He had brought the Black Templars to the Cadian Gate, because that was where the oath required them to be. The Eye of Terror was the wound in reality through which the traitor legions had fled after the heresy, and Sigismund had concluded, correctly as millennia of subsequent history would confirm, that the traitors would return through it. He had stationed his fleet at the gate. He had sent scout ships into the Eye itself, searching for the enemy he knew was in there. He had not waited for the enemy to come to him. He had gone looking. Abaddon came out. The Lord of the Black Legion emerged from the Eye with his warband and attacked the Templar fleet, and the battle that followed was the first Black Crusade. The first of what would become a recurring nightmare for the Imperium, but which was, at this stage, simply a former brother knocking on the door of a galaxy he had been exiled from. Abaddon boarded the Eternal Crusade. His warriors carved a path through the Black Templars defending the ship, and the slaughter was considerable on both sides. Space Marines killing Space Marines. The heresy's wounds reopened in the corridors of a warship named for the oath that had been sworn in response to the heresy's end. Abaddon found Sigismund. The Lord of the Black Legion and the first Emperor's champion faced each other in a large chamber of the ship, their warriors drawn back in a ring. The moment that both of them had known was coming since the day the Eye had swallowed the traitors. Abaddon tried to turn him. This is the part of the account that surprises people who know Abaddon only as a destroyer. The despoiler spoke to Sigismund with something that sounded almost like respect, perhaps even like affection, the distant memory of a time when they had served the same cause. He offered the Emperor's champion a place in the new order. He argued that the Imperium was dead, that the Emperor was a corpse on a golden chair, that clinging to the service of something that could not hear the service and could not reward it was beneath a warrior of Sigismund's stature. "Join us," Abaddon said. "The galaxy belongs to the warriors who bled to build it, not to the corpse who let it burn." Sigismund refused. He drew his blade and he attacked the Lord of the Black Legion, and the duel was everything the heresy-era duels had been. Two of the finest warriors in the galaxy locked in a combat that carried the weight of entire civilizations. The chaos-empowered Lord of the Black Legion against the faith-driven champion of a dead Emperor's crusade, fighting for the soul of a galaxy that was watching through the eyes of every warrior in the ring. Sigismund was old. He was the greatest swordsman the legions had ever produced. But he was old, and Abaddon was not old, and the Chaos God's gifts had given the despoiler strength that mortality alone could not match. The duel was close. Closer than it should have been given the disparity. Sigismund in a final act of commitment that was pure Templar, the kind of attack that accepts its own death as the price of the killing blow, drove the black sword through Abaddon's chest, through the armor, through the flesh, into the body of the despoiler himself. It was not enough. Abaddon survived the blow that should have killed him, and in the same moment he brought the Talon of Horus around and tore Sigismund apart. The first High Marshal of the Black Templars died on the deck of a warship at the Cadian Gate, his body broken, his blade still buried in the chest of the enemy he had hunted for centuries. And with his last breath, the breath that should not have been possible, that the wound should not have allowed, Sigismund spoke words that the Black Legion would remember for 10,000 years. "You will die as your weakling father died. Soulless, honorless, weeping, ashamed, the curse of a dying champion delivered to the face of the warrior who had killed him." The last act of faith that Sigismund would ever perform. Abaddon nearly died from the wound. The black sword had come closer to ending him than anything he had faced since the heresy, and the scar it left would stay with him forever, a mark of respect for the man who had inflicted it. When the despoiler recovered, he did something that his own followers found difficult to understand. He returned Sigismund's body to the Imperium, placed it aboard a captured Black Templars frigate, the Valorous Vow, along with the Black Sword, into which the sorcerer Iskandar Khayon carved 3 words at Abaddon's instruction. "We are returned." The ship was sent on its long journey to Terra, carrying the declaration of the Long War and the body of the warrior who had been its first casualty. It was an act of respect from the destroyer of worlds, an acknowledgement that what Sigismund had been was worthy of honor, even from the enemy he had sworn to destroy. The Black Templars took their founder's body, and his oath, and his fury, and they kept going. 10,000 years and counting. Sigismund died, and the crusade did not. That was the point. The crusade was always supposed to outlast the man who started it. The emperor of mankind did not want to be worshipped. This is one of the more bitter ironies of imperial history, and the Black Templars are the most complete expression of why the irony matters. The emperor who walked among his legions during the Great Crusade was explicit. He was not a god. The imperial truth, the philosophical framework he built the crusade around, was specifically and intentionally secular. Religion was a weakness. Superstition was a weapon the enemy used. Faith in powers beyond the material universe was the door through which chaos entered, and the emperor had declared that door closed. The Black Templars have kicked it open. Not in defiance of the emperor, the Templars would recoil from the suggestion, and the recoil would be violent, in devotion to him. The distinction between what the emperor said he was and what the Black Templars believe he is has been settled in their theology by the simple observation that millennia of evidence since the heresy points in one direction. The emperor sits on the golden throne. His will sustains the Astronomicon. His power holds shut the gate that would otherwise let the warp consume reality. His psychic presence, diminished but not extinguished, reaches across the galaxy to touch the souls of those who serve him. If this is not divinity, then the word has no meaning. The ecclesiarchy, the Imperium's official religious institution, the church that worships the emperor as a god and administers the faith of trillions, would seem to be a natural ally for a chapter that shares its fundamental doctrinal position. It is in some ways. The Black Templars are among the few chapters that the ecclesiarchy regards with genuine warmth, rather than the careful institutional distance that most Space Marine church interactions produce. The Templars defend shrine worlds with a ferocity that the ecclesiarchy deeply appreciates. They treat the Emperor's temples as holy ground. They share the ecclesiarchy's conviction that the Emperor is divine and that service to him is a sacred act. But the Black Templars' faith is not the ecclesiarchy's faith. The ecclesiarchy's faith is institutional. It operates through bureaucracy, through the Ministerum's enormous administrative machinery, through priests and cardinals and the careful management of a galaxy-spanning religion that must accommodate billions of local variations while maintaining doctrinal coherence. It is faith as governance, faith as structure, faith as the tool by which the Imperium's trillion-strong population is kept pointed in approximately the same theological direction. The Black Templars' faith is personal. It burns in each warrior individually, and it burns hot enough to scorch the things around it. A Templar does not worship the Emperor because the institution says he should. He worships because he has felt the Emperor's presence. In the heat of battle, in the moment before the charge, in the visions that come to the warrior who will be the next emperor's champion. The faith is not learned from a catechism. It is experienced. And the experience is so intense that the warrior who has felt it does not need to be told to believe. This produces a quality of religious devotion that the ecclesiarchy sometimes finds uncomfortable despite sharing the core belief. The Black Templars are true believers in a way that the ecclesiarchy's professional clergy often are not. And the intensity of that true belief can be directed at targets the ecclesiarchy would prefer to leave untouched. Witches, mutants, aliens, heretics in all their forms, not just the ones the Inquisition has identified and targeted, but anyone who, in the Templars' judgment, has deviated from the Emperor's will as the Templars understand it. The Templars' hatred of the Psyker is the sharpest expression of this. The Imperium uses Psykers. It depends on them. The Astronomicon requires them. Astropathic communication requires them. Space Marine chapters maintain librarians, warrior psychers whose abilities are channeled and controlled and turned to the service of the chapter. The psyker is an accepted, managed, institutionally integrated element of imperial life. The Black Templars refuse the institution. They maintain no librarians. They view the psyker with a suspicion that ranges from distaste to open hostility, moderated only by the practical reality that some psykers serve the Emperor's will, and that destroying the Emperor's servants is not consistent with serving him. But the suspicion is deep and genuine, rooted in a theological position that connects the psyker's power to the warp and the warp to chaos, and chaos to everything the Templars exist to destroy. There is hypocrisy in this, or at least a contradiction that the Templars' theology does not fully resolve. The Emperor is the most powerful psyker who ever lived. His power is what keeps the Imperium alive. The faith the Templars carry, the visions the Emperor's champion receives, the sense of divine presence that the warriors report in their most desperate battles. All of this is, at some level, psychic in nature. The Templars worship a god whose nature is psychic, and they hate psykers. The resolution the Templars arrive at, to the extent that they articulate one, is that the Emperor's power is divine and therefore different in kind from the psyker's power, which is mortal and therefore dangerous. The Emperor's touch elevates. The psyker's gift corrupts. The distinction is not defensible in the strict theological sense, and the Templars do not defend it in the strict theological sense. They hold it as an article of faith, which means they hold it beyond the reach of argument. This is what faith means in the Black Templars chapter. Not a rational conclusion, not a defensible position, a fire that burns because it burns, and that the warrior carries because the alternative is a galaxy without meaning. And a galaxy without meaning is not one the Black Templars are willing to fight for. They fight for a galaxy in which the Emperor is God, in which their crusade is holy, in which their enemies are the enemies of divinity itself, and the act of destroying those enemies is worship made manifest. This is not a belief system that produces moderation. It is not meant to. The Codex Astartes prescribes a structure. Companies, captains, a scout company for the newest warriors, reserve companies for the mid-career veterans, the first company for the elite. The structure is designed for clarity, for institutional management, for the kind of orderly deployment that makes it possible for the wider Imperium to understand what a chapter's fighting strength consists of, and how it can be used. The Black Templars have never used this structure. Not because they reject the Codex Astartes in principle, they are not. Technically, non-compliant in the way that some chapters are openly non-compliant. They simply organize around the crusade rather than around the garrison, and the crusade produces a different structure because it answers different needs. The fundamental unit is the crusade fleet. A Black Templars crusade is a self-contained fighting force, a fleet, a body of warriors, a mission, a marshal to command it, and the infrastructure required to sustain all of these in the field indefinitely. There are always multiple crusades operating simultaneously. At least 3 at any given time, sometimes more at one point during the event the chapter records as the treachery of Dalmark. There were 14 crusades active across the galaxy simultaneously, and the Imperium's institutional response to this was a quiet decision not to add up the numbers too carefully. Each crusade fleet operates under the authority of a marshal. The marshal is equivalent in rank to a captain in a codex-compliant chapter, but the role carries more independence than a captain typically enjoys. A crusade fleet operating on the far side of the galaxy from the High Marshal cannot wait for orders from the chapter's supreme commander. The marshal is empowered to make strategic decisions, select targets, initiate and conclude campaigns, negotiate with imperial authorities, and in all respects command the crusade as though it were an independent chapter. Within the bounds of the crusade's overall purpose and the High Marshal's standing instructions. This independence is not administrative license. It is theological trust. The Marshal commands because the High Marshal has judged him worthy of the command, and the worthiness is demonstrated through ritual combat among the Sword Brethren, the chapter's veteran elite, from whose ranks the marshals are drawn. The combat is not a formal tournament. It is a test conducted among warriors who know each other's capabilities intimately, that determines which of them carries the combination of martial excellence and leadership capacity that the role requires. Below the marshal, the Castellan commands the fighting company, the unit that, in the field, does most of the actual engagement. The Castellan is also drawn from the Sword Brethren, and the rank carries both operational command responsibility and administrative authority over chapter keeps on conquered or reclaimed worlds. A Castellan who holds a chapter keep is not simply a military commander posted to a garrison. He is the Black Templars' presence on that world, and his authority extends to the recruitment and initial training of new warriors drawn from the local population. The chapter keeps are the closest thing the Black Templars have to a permanent territorial presence. Established on worlds the Crusade has liberated or conquered, they serve as staging posts for future Crusade fleets, recruitment centers for new warriors, and the physical expression of the Black Templars' claim on a world they have fought for. They are not home worlds. They are forward bases in a war that never retreats far enough to have a rear area. The Sword Brethren themselves deserve attention, because they represent the closest thing the chapter has to a first company in the Codex sense. The elite veterans, the warriors who have distinguished themselves across years of crusading to the point where the chapter recognizes them as something above the standard. They fight as an honor guard around the marshal, as the tip of the assault when the crusade meets resistance too serious for the standard fighting companies, and as the pool from which future leaders are selected. To become a sword brother is to have proven yourself in the Black Templars' terms. which means not simply competence in war, but the kind of devotion and fury that the chapter prizes above all other qualities. And then there is the relationship between initiate and neophyte, which is unlike anything in the Codex Astartes, and which tells you something fundamental about how the Black Templars understand the making of a warrior. Most chapters train their recruits in a scout company. The newest warriors serve together, learn together, develop together under the supervision of a veteran sergeant. And when they have completed their training, they are promoted to full battle brothers and distributed to the line companies. The training period is separate from the fighting. The scout's role is defined differently from the battle brothers: lighter armor, reconnaissance-oriented deployment. A level of risk that is calibrated to the recruit's incomplete development. The Black Templars do not separate training from fighting. A neophyte, a recruit who has received the gene seed and begun the transformation but has not yet completed his development, is assigned directly to an initiate, a fully developed battle brother. The neophyte fights beside the initiate, not in a sheltered role, not in the reconnaissance positions that other chapters use to manage the risk to their developing warriors. In the line, in the assault, in the full fury of whatever the crusade is currently engaged in, with all the risk that entails. The neophyte learns by doing under fire, alongside a warrior whose example is the curriculum. The initiate teaches by fighting, with the neophyte at his side. And the relationship between them is not instructor and student in the academic sense. It is mentor and apprentice in the medieval sense. The older warrior passing his knowledge to the younger through shared experience, shared danger, and the kind of bond that only forms between people who have kept each other alive in conditions that were trying to kill them both. The attrition among neophytes is higher than in chapters that use the scout company model. The Black Templars accept this. The warriors who survive the neophyte phase, who have fought from the beginning, who have been tested in the full spectrum of what the crusade demands, who have learned war not as theory but as daily lived experience, are harder, more complete, more immediately effective as full initiates than warriors whose training was conducted in a more controlled environment. This is the Black Templars' approach to everything compressed into a single institutional decision. The harder path produces the better warrior, and the cost of the harder path is acceptable because the warrior it produces is what the Emperor's crusade requires. No half measures. The Templars do not believe in half measures. On the eve of battle, something happens. It does not happen every time. It does not happen predictably, and it does not happen to the same warrior twice. But before the Black Templars commit to an engagement of sufficient importance, before the crusade meets an enemy worthy of the chapter's full attention, one of the initiates will receive a vision. The vision comes during prayer or during the rituals of preparation that precede a major engagement, or in the restless hours of the watch before the assault begins. A warrior who has been an initiate for years, who has fought with skill and fury and devotion but who has never been singled out for distinction above his brothers, will suddenly know something that he did not know before. He will see the battle to come. He will see the enemy's champions. He will understand, with a certainty that does not come from intelligence briefings or tactical analysis, but from something deeper and more absolute, that he is the one who must face them. He becomes the Emperor's champion. The tradition reaches back to Sigismund Back to the Siege of Terror, back to the moment when Rogel Dawn appointed the finest swordsman in the legions to stand as the Emperor's personal representative on the battlefield. Sigismund was the first champion because Dawn recognized what the role required and knew who could fill it. The tradition the Black Templars have built from that origin is different in form but identical in function. The Emperor's champion is the warrior who carries the Emperor's will into the most dangerous fights the Crusade can offer. The warrior who receives the vision does not volunteer. He is chosen by the Emperor, in the Templars' understanding, by whatever psychic or spiritual mechanism produces the vision, in the understanding of those who study such things from outside the chapter's theology. The distinction does not matter to the Templars. The Emperor chose him. He goes. He is given the Black Sword, a masterwork power weapon, one of the chapter's most revered artifacts, carried by Emperor's champions across the millennia. He is given the armor of faith, a suit of ancient artificer plate maintained by the chapter's tech marines, with the reverence that lesser institutions reserve for their most sacred objects. His own armor is stripped of personal heraldry. The champion fights without the marks that identify an individual. Because the Emperor's champion is not an individual, he is a role. The warrior wearing the armor matters less than what the armor represents. The continuation of Sigismund's line, the living expression of the Emperor's will in combat. The champion seeks out the enemy's most powerful warriors and he fights them. This is not a tactical choice in the conventional sense. The champion does not wait for the correct moment or calculate the optimal angle of engagement. He goes directly at the thing that must be destroyed. The faith that drives him is not strategic. It is an imperative, a compulsion that comes from the vision and that does not permit the kind of careful consideration that other warriors bring to their targeting decisions. He fights until the enemy's champion is dead, or until he is dead himself. There is no withdrawal for the Emperor's champion. The role permits no strategic reconsideration. The warrior who accepted the vision accepted everything that comes with it, including the high probability that this is his last battle. Many Emperor's champions die. The role has a mortality rate that would be unsustainable if it were a permanent appointment rather than a battle-by-battle selection. The warrior who receives the vision and takes up the Black Sword is, in many cases, the warrior who will not return from the engagement. The chapter honors this. The death of an Emperor's champion is not mourned in the ordinary sense. It is venerated. The champion died doing what the Emperor chose him to do, in the manner the Emperor chose, against the enemy the Emperor identified. There is no higher death available to a Black Templar, and on the eve of the next major battle, another warrior will receive the vision, and the cycle begins again. The vows that accompany the crusade are an extension of this theology of commitment. Before a major engagement, the Crusade's warriors swear additional vows beyond those that already bind them as Black Templars. These vows are not administrative, they are devotional, and they carry real consequences in how the warriors fight. The vow to accept any challenge, no matter the odds. The vow to suffer not the unclean to live. The vow to abhor the witch, destroy the witch. The vow to uphold the honor of the Emperor. Each of these sharpens the warrior's commitment to a single edge. They will fight harder, accept more risk, and pursue the enemy with a fury that the vow intensifies beyond what the standard commitment to war already provides. The vows are not rhetoric. A warrior who has sworn to accept any challenge, no matter the odds, will engage an enemy that a more cautious commander would avoid. A warrior who has sworn to abhor the witch will attack a psyker with a priority and a violence that goes past tactical sense into the realm of religious compulsion. The vows bind the warriors to specific patterns of behavior that make them more dangerous, more aggressive, and more willing to accept the personal cost of those qualities. This is the trade-off at the heart of the Black Templars' combat doctrine. The vows make them more ferocious. The ferocity makes them more effective in the assault. The assault is where the Black Templars live. The close range, blade to blade, eye-to-eye engagement where the warrior's individual commitment and fury determine the outcome. But the ferocity also makes them harder to control, harder to integrate into combined operations, harder to restrain when restraint would produce a better strategic outcome. The Templars do not view this as a trade-off. They view it as a choice that has already been made. The Emperor requires fury. The Crusade provides fury. The vows ensure that fury is never less than absolute. The Black Templars close the distance. This is the simplest way to describe their combat doctrine, and it is accurate in the way that simple descriptions of complex things can be accurate. It captures the essential truth while leaving the detail for closer examination. The Black Templars fight at close quarters. They advance into the enemy's position. They engage with blade and fist and the intimate violence of combat at ranges where the warrior can see the face of the thing he is killing. They do not prefer this. They insist on it, with a vehemence that makes the insistence itself a tactical statement. The bolter is present. The Black Templars use ranged weapons. They are Space Marines, and the tools of the Adeptus Astartes are available to them. But the bolter, for the Black Templars, is the weapon you use on the approach. It is what fills the time between the Crusade's arrival and the Crusade's engagement at the range that matters. The killing range. The range where the chainsword does its work, and the power sword finds its mark and the warrior's fury is expressed in the most direct possible form. There is a practice among the Black Templars that other chapters regard with a mixture of awe and concern. Warriors chain their weapons to their wrists. Not figuratively. Actual chains, binding the weapon to the warrior's armor, ensuring that the blade cannot be lost or dropped or taken. The chains serve a practical function. A warrior in the chaos of a melee who loses his weapon is a warrior who dies, and the chains prevent that loss. But the chains mean more than their function. They are a statement. The warrior who chains his weapon to his body is saying, "I am not putting this down. I am not withdrawing. I am not going to reach a point in this fight where I decide the fight is over and I should stop." The fight ends when the enemy is dead, or I am. Those are the options. The chains say so. This is called devotional zeal in the chapter's language. And the language is not accidental. The chains are an act of faith. The warrior who binds himself to his weapon is performing a ritual as much as a practical action. He is committing himself to the engagement in a way that goes past the tactical and into the sacramental. He is offering himself to the Emperor's war without reservation, without the possibility of retreat that an unchained weapon would technically allow. The chains close the exit. The warrior goes forward or dies where he stands. Combined with the vows, the Emperor's champion, and the chapter's general religious intensity, this produces combat behavior that is, in the clinical assessment of Imperial military observers who have watched the Black Templars fight, among the most aggressive in the Adeptus Astartes. The Templars do not simply assault. They avalanche. The charge hits the enemy line with a weight of fury and commitment that is, at the point of impact, almost impossible to resist. Not because the individual Templars are stronger or faster than other Space Marines, but because the individual Templars are fighting without the internal governor that makes most warriors at some level manage their personal risk. A Space Marine of the Ultramarines fights with controlled aggression, the optimal application of force, calculated, managed, consistent with the warrior's continued survival and contribution to subsequent engagement. A Space Marine of the Black Templars fights with devotional aggression, the maximum application of force, released, committed, with the warrior's continued survival being a welcome outcome rather than a planned one. The difference in how this looks on the battlefield is dramatic. The controlled assault advances, engages, consolidates. The devotional assault crashes into the enemy and keeps going until there is nothing left to crash into. The Black Templars do not consolidate objectives in the conventional sense. They take them, and then they look for the next thing to take, and the advance continues until the enemy has been swept away entirely or the Templars have been stopped by something they could not overcome. This does not always work. No single tactical approach works universally, and the Black Templars' emphasis on close assault creates vulnerabilities that intelligent enemies exploit. A force that insists on closing the distance can be bled by an enemy that maintains range and uses the approach itself as the killing ground. The Tau have done this. Necron forces whose fire discipline exceeds the Templars' approach speed have done this. Enemies who can retreat faster than the Templars, can advance while maintaining effective fire, have turned the devotional charge into a devotional slaughter. The Black Templars have lost battles this way. They do not modify the approach in response. This is the point where the conversation about whether the Black Templars are effective becomes the conversation about whether the Black Templars are wise. And the conversation about wisdom is one the Templars are not interested in having. Wisdom, in the framework of most military thinking, means adapting your approach when the evidence says your approach is getting people killed. The Black Templars' framework does not process the evidence in the same way. Their approach is not derived from tactical theory. It is derived from faith. And faith does not update in response to evidence, because faith is what you hold when the evidence says you should stop holding it. This makes the Black Templars simultaneously one of the most devastating and one of the most frustrating forces to work with in the Imperium. When the assault works, when the enemy's defenses crack under the weight of it, when the fury overwhelms the resistance, when the devotional charge breaks through and the warriors pour into the enemy's position, and the killing becomes total, there is nothing in the galaxy that matches it. When the assault does not work, when the distance cannot be closed, when the enemy's fire cuts the warriors down before they reach striking range, when the tactical situation demands something other than another charge, the Black Templars do not have a ready alternative. They charge again. This is not stupidity. It is commitment. The distinction matters, even when the outcome is the same. High Marshal Helbrecht is the current master of the Black Templars, and the weight of that title is not a thing that a warrior can carry without being shaped by it. He was not born to the role. No Black Templar is. The chapter does not maintain a lineage of succession in the way that some chapters do. The predecessor does not name his replacement. The office does not pass by political appointment. When a high marshal falls, the marshals of the chapter gather, and from among them, through a combination of ritual combat and the consensus of the sword brethren, a new high marshal is chosen. Helbrecht was chosen unanimously in 990.M41 when High Marshal Cordhel was killed by a Cornate berserker and the marshals convened to select his successor. Helbrecht had earned the selection through decades of service as a marshal in his own right, commanding his own crusade under the late Marshal Daedin and subsequently taking command when Daedin was killed. The progression is a common one in the chapter's history. A warrior rises through the ranks by fighting and surviving and demonstrating the qualities the chapter values, inherits command when the commander above him falls, and eventually reaches the point where the other leaders of the chapter recognize him as the best of them. He carries the sword of the High Marshals, one of the most sacred relics in the entire Adeptus Astartes, a power weapon that carries within it fragments of the blade Rogel Dawn wielded when he accompanied the Emperor aboard the Vengeful Spirit in the final hours of the Siege of Terra. The sword is simultaneously a weapon and a statement. It contains pieces of the blade that was present at the moment the Imperium was both saved and broken, the moment when the Emperor's physical body was destroyed and his endurance on the Golden Throne began. Every High Marshal who carries it carries a piece of that moment. The sword reminds them of what was lost and what was preserved, and what the Black Templars exist to protect. Helbrecht fights from the front. This is not unusual for a Space Marine chapter master. Most do. But Helbrecht's version of frontline command is of a particular intensity that reflects both the chapter's culture and his own temperament. He leads assaults personally. He boards enemy vessels at the head of his sword brethren. He has fought void wars, planetary invasions, fleet actions, and the kind of engagements where a chapter master's presence is not only inspirational but operationally decisive, because the warriors who see the High Marshal leading the charge fight harder than warriors who know their commander is observing from a remove. His rivalry with the Necron Pharaon Imhotep the Stormlord is one of the more interesting personal conflicts in the recent history of the Adeptus Astartes. Their encounters have produced the kind of mutual recognition that only repeated combat between exceptional opponents can create. In one early engagement, Imhotep defeated Helbrecht and took his hand as a trophy, a humiliation that the High Marshal processed not as defeat, but as a sign from the Emperor. The loss of his hand was symbolic. Rogel Dawn had lost his hand too, or offered it freely, depending on which tradition you follow. Helbrecht interpreted his own loss through the lens of his Primarch's sacrifice, and emerged from it with his faith not diminished but intensified. Their rematch came years later, when Helbrecht led a boarding action against the inevitable conqueror, Imhotep's personal flagship, a Cairn-class tomb ship of formidable capability. The Black Templars swarmed the vessel, and Helbrecht's rekindled fury proved too much for the Stormlord, who teleported himself to safety before the confrontation could reach its conclusion. Imhotep, with the dry courtesy that Necron Pharaons sometimes deploy, congratulated Helbrecht on one victory apiece before departing. Helbrecht's response was to destroy the inevitable conqueror entirely, not because it was necessary for the operation's success, but because the destruction of the Stormlord's beloved flagship was the clearest available expression of what the High Marshal thought of the Necron's courtesy. This is Helbrecht, not the most subtle commander in the Adeptus Astartes, not the most political, not the man you would send to negotiate a complicated alliance or manage a situation that required patience and restraint. He is the warrior at the head of the charge, the High Marshal whose answer to most problems is to hit them harder and more directly than the problem was expecting to be hit. And behind the fury, a genuine strategic intelligence, an ability to read the Void War and coordinate fleet actions that has made him the preeminent naval commander among the Space Marines, as demonstrated during the Third War for Armageddon when he was appointed to command the combined Space Marine fleet that supported Battlefleet Armageddon. He is, in short, exactly what the Black Templars need at their head: a warrior of absolute faith, absolute ferocity, and just enough tactical sophistication to direct the ferocity where it will do the most damage. The galaxy would not want Helbrecht to be anything else. It may not survive him being anything else. The Third War for Armageddon is one of the largest conflicts in the Imperium's recent history, and the Black Templars' involvement in it produced the single most iconic figure the chapter has given the wider Imperium since Sigismund himself. His name is Merrick Grimaldus. He is the reclusiarch of the Black Templars, the senior chaplain, the keeper of the chapter's spiritual flame, the warrior whose voice carries the weight of the Emperor's faith in the terms the Templars understand it. And what Grimaldus did at Hellstreak is the story that defines what the Black Templars are more completely than any piece of doctrine or theology or institutional analysis can. Armageddon was under attack, the largest Orc-Wa'a since the War of the Beast, led by the warlord Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, who had been building toward this for decades and who was bringing a force that dwarfed anything the Imperium had faced from the Greenskins in millennia, was descending on the Hive world with an intention that was simple and total: destroy it. Destroy everything on it. Destroy the forges, the hives, the billions of human lives that the world supported. The Imperium responded with everything it could gather. The Third War for Armageddon was not one battle, but a campaign of staggering scope, fought across the entire world by forces that included multiple Space Marine chapters, regiments of the Armageddon Steel Legion and other Imperial Guard formations, Titan legions, Sisters of Battle, and the full weight of the Imperium's military machinery deployed in defense of a world it could not afford to lose. High Marshal Helbrecht committed 3 crusades to the war, and personally took command of the combined Space Marine Void presence. His role was strategic, coordinating the fleet, managing the Void War, ensuring that the Orcs' orbital superiority did not translate into the uncontested landings that would have made the ground war impossible. Grimaldus was given a different assignment. He was given 100 warriors, Black Templars initiates and their neophytes, a force that in the context of the war's total scope was a fragment and told to defend Hiv Helsrek, one of Armageddon's largest industrial centers, a city of millions, a target that the Orcs would throw themselves at with everything they had, because the forges and the population and the strategic value of the Hive made it irresistible. 100 Black Templars against the full weight of a Warg that had already overwhelmed the world's outer defenses. Grimaldus did not want the assignment. This is the part that the mythology around him sometimes glosses over, and it matters because it makes the man real. He was not the serene warrior of faith marching toward his duty with divine certainty. He was angry. He resented being given a task that looked, from the outside, like a suicide posting. 100 warriors thrown at a hive city the size of a continent, against an enemy that outnumbered them by orders of magnitude, in defense of a position that the wider strategic picture might have already decided was expendable. He had learned his resentment from experience. Before Hellshriek, before the title and the myth, Grimaldus had already watched a chapter die. At Varadon, as an apprentice to Reclusiarch Mordred, he had witnessed the complete annihilation of the Shadow Wolves chapter, the last battle brother dying with his banner raised, his blade broken, his bolter empty, while the Black Templars fought to reach them and could not break through the Tyrannid swarms in time. The last thing Grimaldus saw at Varadon was a chapter that deserved salvation, receiving only a witness to its end. That witnessing shaped everything that followed. The young chaplain who arrived at Hellshriek carried Varadon with him. The knowledge that faith is not always sufficient, that the Emperor does not always intervene, that sometimes warriors who deserve to live do not. This is the private darkness behind the public fury. The thing that makes Grimaldus more than a propaganda figure. He is not a man who has never known doubt. He is a man who has known doubt and who has chosen faith anyway. And the choosing is harder and more valuable than the certainty that never had to choose. He went to Hellshriek anyway. Because he was a Black Templar, and Black Templars do not refuse their duty, and the duty was the defense of Hellshriek. What happened in Hellshriek over the following weeks is among the most brutal sustained engagements in recent Imperial history. The Orcs came, and they kept coming. The Defenders, the Black Templars, the Steel Legion, 19 Titans of the Legio Invigilata, 97 Battle Sisters of the Order of the Argent Shroud, and the civilian militias that Grimaldus welded into something resembling a fighting force, held them. Not easily, not cleanly, with mounting losses and mounting desperation, and the grinding horror of a siege that does not relent, and that the defenders cannot win in any conventional sense, because the enemy's resources are effectively infinite. The Titans fell, one by one. The god machines of the Legio Invigilata, which had seemed like the most invulnerable things on the battlefield, were brought down by the sheer weight of Orc assault. The loss of each Titan was a catastrophe felt across the entire defensive line, not just militarily but psychologically, because if the Titans could fall, what could possibly stand? Grimaldus stood. That is what the witnesses remember most clearly. Not the tactical decisions, which were competent but not remarkable. Not the specific engagements which blurred together in the grinding sameness of weeks under siege. What they remember is the chaplain's refusal to be moved by what was happening around him. The walls fell and Grimaldus stood. The warriors died and Grimaldus stood. The situation became hopeless, and Grimaldus stood. And his standing was not stubbornness or stupidity, but the physical expression of a faith so absolute that the evidence of the senses could not override it. Grimaldus became something during that siege. Not the angry, reluctant commander who had arrived resenting his assignment. Something else. The battle changed him, or revealed what was already in him, or the Emperor's will moved through him in the way the Black Templars believe it does. What the defenders of Hellshriek saw was a chaplain who was everywhere the fighting was worst, whose voice carried across the chaos of the battle like something physical, whose presence in a section of the line meant that section would not fall because Grimaldus would not allow it to fall. He fought alongside humans. This matters more than it might seem. The Black Templars are not renowned for their warmth toward the unaugmented people they defend. The gap between the transhuman Astartes and the ordinary human is a distance most chapters do not try to cross. Grimaldus crossed it. In the crucible of Helsreek, he developed a relationship with the Steel Legion troopers and the Hive militia that went past the usual Astartes condescension toward something closer to genuine respect. They were fighting for the same hive. They were dying for the same walls. The difference between their bodies and his was less important in the grinding day-to-day reality of the siege than the sameness of what they were trying to do. The Temple of the Emperor Ascendant was the battle's symbolic heart, an ancient church, one of the oldest structures on Armageddon, housing relics that the Ecclesiarchy and the Black Templars both regarded as sacred. Grimaldus made its defense a personal mission within the larger mission of the Hive's defense, not because the temple was strategically critical in the way that a forge or a wall was strategically critical, but because what the temple represented, the Emperor's faith, made manifest in stone and relic and centuries of devotion, was the thing the Black Templars fought for, and to lose it was to lose something that could not be rebuilt. The orcs hit the temple. They hit it with everything they had, because the orcs are drawn to the places where the fighting is fiercest, and the temple was where Grimaldus fought, and so the temple was where the fiercest fighting was. The assault battered the defenders. The casualties mounted. The structure itself, ancient and massive, and never designed to withstand the kind of assault that a war could bring to bear, began to fail. The temple collapsed. It collapsed around Grimaldus and the defenders who remained inside it, and the rubble buried everything. The orcs, the defenders, the relics, the chaplain. Everyone who saw it happen believed that the defenders were dead, that the temple was gone, that Grimaldus was gone. He was not gone. Grimaldus, bloody and broken, climbed out of the rubble. He emerged carrying 3 of the temple's relics, a column from the major altar, the banner of the Emperor Victorious, and holy water from the Stoop of Elucidation. The apothecaries who examined him afterward could not explain how he had survived the collapse, much less found the strength to dig himself free while carrying objects that weighed as much as he did in his armor. Grimaldus could explain it. The Emperor willed it. Of the 100 Black Templars who had been assigned to defend Helsreich, Grimaldus was the only survivor by the war's end. 100 warriors had gone in. 1 had come out. The hive was held. The forges were preserved. The civilians who had sheltered behind the Black Templars' line were alive because Grimaldus and his brothers had stood where they stood and refused to be moved. The citizens of Helsreich gave him a title that the Reclusiarch never asked for, and that the chapter has never formally acknowledged, but that every warrior in the Black Templars and every imperial citizen who knows the story uses without hesitation. The hero of Helsreich. Grimaldus does not use the title himself. He does not believe that what he did was heroic. He believes it was what the Emperor required of him, and that doing what the Emperor requires is not heroism but duty. The distinction between those two things is where Grimaldus lives as a character, and it is the distinction that makes him the most complete expression of the Black Templars' identity that the chapter has produced in 10,000 years. He did not want to go to Helsreich. He went, he fought, He lost everything, every brother who served beside him, the temple he was sworn to defend, the pride he had carried about his own assignment, and from the rubble of everything he lost, he emerged carrying what mattered: the relics, the faith, the will to keep fighting. That is the Black Templars in one man. That is what the Crusade produces when it presses hard enough. The Eternal Crusader is not simply a warship. It is a cathedral, a fortress monastery, a reliquary, and a home. All of these things contained in the hull of a battle barge that has carried the Black Templars across the galaxy for millennia, and that serves as the physical center of a chapter that has no other center. Most Space Marine chapters maintain fortress monasteries on their homeworlds, massive installations that serve as the chapter's administrative heart, its gene seed repository, its training facility, its place of rest between campaigns. The fortress monastery is permanent. It does not move. It is the anchor, and the chapter extends from it and returns to it in the rhythm that campaign and recovery establish over centuries. The Eternal Crusader moves. It is one of the largest vessels in the Imperium's military inventory, a battle barge of ancient construction and considerable modification, capable of carrying a substantial portion of the chapter's warriors along with their vehicles, equipment, and the accumulated relics and trophies of centuries of unbroken war. Its holds contain armories that have been stocked and restocked across millennia. Its chapels are among the most sacred spaces in the Adeptus Astartes, adorned with the relics of the chapter's greatest victories, the bones of fallen champions, the battle standards that have been carried into 100 crusades. The reclusium aboard the Eternal Crusader is said to be as impressive as any temple in the Ecclesiarchy's care, and the comparison is not flattery. The High Marshal travels aboard the Eternal Crusader between crusades. Not as a commander uses a flagship for transport. The Eternal Crusader is where Helbrecht conducts the business of the chapter, where the marshals convene when a chapter council is required, where the most significant decisions about the direction of the Eternal Crusade are made. It is the place where new High Marshals are elevated, where the sword of the High Marshals is passed from the dead to the living, where the oath that began the crusade is renewed by each new commander. The ship also functions as what it is, a weapon of war. The Eternal Crusader has fought in more void engagements than most fleet elements in the Imperium's navy and its augmented weapons systems, maintained across millennia, upgraded where the chapter's relationship with the Adeptus Mechanicus permits, seasoned by the accumulated experience of thousands of void battles, make it a formidable opponent. A fleet that encounters the Eternal Crusader in the void is not fighting a transport that happens to carry warriors. It is fighting a warship that also happens to be the most sacred installation of one of the Imperium's most aggressive chapters. Beyond the Eternal Crusader, the chapter's fleet is distributed across its multiple crusade fleets, battle barges, strike cruisers, the various escort vessels and transport ships that a crusade requires to sustain itself during extended campaigning. Each crusade fleet is, in effect, a self-contained chapter, with its own flagship, its own support vessels, its own logistical capacity. The fleet-based nature of the chapter means the Black Templars are among the most mobile forces in the Adeptus Astartes, capable of redeploying across vast distances, arriving at crisis points that static chapters cannot reach in time, projecting force across multiple sectors simultaneously. This mobility has strategic value that the Imperium relies on, sometimes without explicitly acknowledging the reliance. When a crisis emerges at a location that no fixed chapter can reach quickly enough, The Black Templars' crusade fleets, already in motion, already at war, already looking for the next fight, can redirect. They do not need to mobilize from a standing start. They are already mobilized. They have been mobilized for 10,000 years. The Imperium has used this mobility extensively, sometimes directing Black Templar crusades toward threats that the standard military response pipeline cannot address in time. The Templars accept these directions with the enthusiasm of warriors who are always looking for the next fight anyway. The redirection does not feel like a new task imposed on the chapter, but like the Emperor's hand pointing them toward the enemy he wants destroyed next. The fleet-based existence produces a culture that is different from the homeworld-anchored chapter, in ways that extend beyond logistics. A warrior who has never known a world as home, who has grown up inside a warship, who has been recruited from a chapter keep and sent directly to a crusade fleet, this warrior does not have the relationship to solid ground that most space marines develop. His sky has always been a bulkhead. His horizon has always been a viewport. The world beneath his feet has always been moving, and the movement has always been toward war. This shapes psychology, not in the way that clinical language describes. The Black Templars would not submit to clinical language, but in the practical sense that warriors who have never experienced peace as a state, who have never lived in the interval between wars, who have never known what it feels like to be done, are warriors for whom war is not an interruption of life, but the substance of life itself. They do not fight and then rest. They fight and then fight, and the interval between is the transit time between one engagement and the next. The Eternal Crusader carries this psychology in its bones. The ship is built for war. It is maintained for war. Its rhythms are the rhythms of preparation and execution and preparation again. And the warriors who live inside it synchronize with those rhythms until the ship and the crusade and the warrior are not three things but one thing, moving through the galaxy as a single expression of the oath Sigismund swore. It has been doing this for 10,000 years. The ship shows it, in the accumulated weight of the relics, in the layers of modification and repair and reinforcement that 10 millennia of combat produce, in the sheer presence of a vessel that has survived more wars than most civilizations have fought. The Eternal Crusader is not young, and it is not pristine, and it carries its age the way the chapter carries it, as evidence that what it is doing works, because what it is doing has not been stopped. The Black Templars carry the gene seed of Rogel Dawn, and the gene seed of Rogel Dawn carries qualities that the Templars have taken in a direction their Primarch might not have anticipated. Dawn was a builder. This is the aspect of the Seven-Fae Primarch that the Imperial Fists, the Black Templars' parent legion, emphasize most completely, and it is accurate. Dawn built the defenses of Terra. He fortified the Imperial Palace. His strategic genius expressed itself through the creation of structures that could withstand assault, through the patient engineering of positions that were designed to hold rather than to advance, through the understanding that the most effective military action is sometimes the refusal to give ground rather than the acquisition of new ground. The Black Templars inherited the gene seed and declined the philosophy, not in every respect. The Templars can dig in when digging in is what the situation demands. Hellsreach demonstrated this in the most dramatic possible way, with 100 warriors defending a hive city for weeks against a war. They are not incapable of defense, but their institutional preference is not for the wall, it is for the sword. Where Dawn built, Sigismund attacked. Where the Imperial Fists established positions, the Black Templars left them. The gene seed that produced patient engineers in the parent legion produced crusading berserkers in the successor. And the biological material is the same. This tells you something about the relationship between gene seed and chapter culture. The gene seed provides the physical foundation. It does not determine the culture. What Dawn's genetics give the Black Templars is the physical resilience and the structural soundness of the 7 Legions warriors, the durability, the ability to sustain damage and continue fighting, the specific toughness that makes the Imperial Fists and their successors among the hardest warriors to put down permanently. These qualities serve the Black Templars' aggressive approach well, because a warrior who can absorb punishment on the approach survives to deliver the assault. What the gene seed does not give them is the temperament. The temperament, the fury, the faith, the crusading zeal comes from Sigismund. From the culture he built, from the oath he swore and the institutions he established and the quality of devotion he embedded in the chapter's identity. The gene seed is Dawn's. The soul is Sigismund's. And the distance between the two is the distance between a fortified wall and a charging sword. The gene seed's stability is worth noting. The Imperial Fists gene seed is among the most reliable in the Adeptus Astartes. It does not produce the mutations that threaten some chapters, does not create the biological afflictions that define others, does not degrade over the generations in ways that would compromise the chapter's ability to replenish. The Black Templars' ongoing recruitment and expansion, their sustained growth past the Codex-mandated limit of 1,000 warriors, is partly possible because the gene seed does not resist the expansion. The biological material is stable enough to be implanted in a larger number of recruits, without the quality control problems that some chapters face when they try to grow. There is a loss though. The Betcher's gland, the organ that produces the acidic spittle that some Astartes use as a last resort weapon, and the Susan membrane, the organ that allows suspended animation in critical situations, are non-functional in the Imperial Fists gene seed, and therefore in the Black Templars. These losses are trivial in the context of what the gene seed provides, but they are worth mentioning because they represent the one respect in which the Dawn lineage is diminished relative to the full Astartes template. The Templars do not dwell on this diminishment. They have never been the chapter that focused on what they lacked. They are the chapter that uses what they have at maximum intensity, against everything the galaxy puts in front of them. What Dawn would make of what his gene seed produced in the Black Templars is one of the more interesting counterfactual questions in the Adeptus Astartes. The Primarch who built walls, watching his successors tear across the galaxy in a 10,000-year assault that has not paused to build anything. The Primarch who valued precision and patience, watching a chapter that values fury and faith. The Primarch who fortified, watching a chapter that refuses to stand still long enough to need fortification. Would Dawn approve? The Templars believe he would, because the Templars believe that everything they do serves the Emperor, and Dawn served the Emperor above all other things. The Imperial Fists might have a different view. The relationship between the two chapters, parent and successor, wall and sword, is cordial but not without the specific tension that arises when two groups who share an ancestor interpret that ancestor's legacy in diametrically opposite ways. Both are right in some sense. Dawn built walls because the emperor needed walls. Sigismund drew his sword because the emperor needed swords. The legacy contains both, and the successors who carry it have simply chosen which part to emphasize. The Black Templars chose the sword. They have never looked back. The Codex Astartes says a chapter shall consist of 1,000 warriors. The Black Templars are, by the most informed estimates available to the Inquisition, approximately 6 times that number. The question of how they manage this, not logistically, which is straightforward enough for a fleet-based chapter with multiple simultaneous crusade fleets, but institutionally, in the sense of how they have sustained what amounts to the most significant ongoing defiance of the Codex's force limitations in imperial history, is a question worth examining. The answer begins with distribution. A chapter of 1,000 warriors stationed in a fortress monastery on a single world is easy to count. Marshals, captains, and their warriors are present in one location. The Administratum's records can be checked against the physical reality. The Inquisition can verify compliance. The number is knowable. A chapter of 6,000 warriors, dispersed across a dozen crusade fleets operating in different regions of the galaxy, each fleet fighting its own campaign, each campaign generating its own casualties and its own recruitment. This number is very difficult to verify. You would need to count every crusade simultaneously, which would require the kind of coordinated intelligence gathering that the Inquisition is capable of in theory, but has never chosen to direct at the Black Templars in practice. Why? Because the practical calculus does not support the effort. The Black Templars are loyal. Their loyalty is not in question, and has never been in question. They are among the most ferociously devoted servants of the Emperor in the entire Adeptus Astartes. And their record of service across 10,000 years is beyond reproach. They fight constantly in multiple theaters against the Imperium's worst enemies. Confronting them about their numbers would require either a military action that the Imperium cannot afford against one of its most effective chapters, or a political confrontation that would produce no gain and considerable risk. And the confrontation would be about what exactly? A chapter that has too many warriors? The Imperium's problem in general is that it does not have enough warriors. The orcs do not stop coming because a chapter is too large. The chaos warbands that pour out of the Eye of Terror are not deterred by administrative compliance. The Tyrannid hive fleets do not consult the Codex Astartes before they decide which world to consume. So the Inquisition notes the rumored numbers, files the relevant intelligence, and makes no move. The Administratum receives the Black Templars' operational reports, which are honest about outcomes, enemies engaged, and losses sustained, and which are conspicuously imprecise about the total force size that produced those outcomes, and processes them without demanding the clarification that a more pedantic institution would require. It is an understanding. Unspoken, unadministered, maintained across millennia by the mutual recognition that the Black Templars' defiance of the Codex's force limits is less dangerous than the Black Templars' compliance with them would be. A galaxy in which the Black Templars numbered only 1,000 warriors would be a galaxy with fewer crusades, fewer defended sectors, fewer responses to the crises that emerge faster than conventional forces can address them. The Black Templars are aware of the understanding and do nothing to destabilize it. They do not boast about their numbers. They do not flaunt the excess. The High Marshal knows the true figure. The Marshals know the figures for their own crusades. and nobody publishes a consolidated total that would force the institutions that maintain the understanding to acknowledge what the understanding actually accommodates. There is a bureaucratic elegance to this. The Imperium's institutional framework was built for compliance, and the Black Templars have found the gap. The place where the framework's reporting requirements can be satisfied without the underlying reality being challenged. Because the framework does not require the underlying reality to be checked. If nobody asks. Nobody asks. The result is a chapter that functions as a legion in all but name, not with the political independence that the heresy-era legions had. The Black Templars do not claim territorial sovereignty, do not maintain the kind of institutional infrastructure that a legion required, do not answer to a primarch. But with the military mass that a legion provided, thousands of warriors under arms, deployed across the galaxy, fighting multiple wars simultaneously, capable of projecting force at a scale that no Codex-compliant chapter can match. Whether this makes the Black Templars a threat to the Imperium or an asset to it depends on the answer to a question that the Inquisition has been evaluating for 10,000 years. What happens if a force this large, this zealous, this committed to its own vision of the Emperor's will, decides that its vision and the Imperium's institutional direction have diverged? Nothing. So far, the Black Templars have never wavered. Their vision and the Imperium's direction have occasionally been in tension. The Templars' anti-psycho stance, their occasional enthusiasm for targets the Inquisition would prefer they leave alone, their treatment of suspected witches and mutants, but never in outright conflict. The oath has held. The faith has remained pointed at the enemy. For 10,000 years the understanding has been sufficient. Whether it will continue to be sufficient is a question that some inquisitors, in their more candid moments, acknowledge they do not have the answer to. 10,000 years of crusade produce a history that no single account can fully capture. But the shape of it can be traced through the chapter's most significant engagements, the moments where the Black Templars' particular qualities were tested most severely, and where the results tell you something about what the Crusade has made of them. After Sigismund's death at the First Battle of Cadia, the chapter's marshals continued the Eternal Crusade under a succession of high marshals, who each renewed the founder's oath and directed the crusade toward whatever corner of the galaxy most urgently required the Templars' attention. The crusade did not follow a single strategic line. It branched and recombined and redirected, each crusade fleet pursuing its own campaign, while the High Marshal maintained what coherence the chapter's dispersed structure allowed. The age of apostasy brought the Black Templars to terror itself, not to defend it from external enemies, but to cleanse it of the internal corruption that the tyrant Gouge Van Deer had installed at the heart of the Imperium's religious and political institutions. Van Deer, who had seized control of both the administratum and the ecclesiarchy, and had turned the Imperium's governance into a vehicle for his personal megalomania, was precisely the kind of enemy the Black Templars' theology compelled them to destroy. Not a Xenos threat, not a chaos incursion, a human being who had corrupted the Emperor's institutions and who was using the Emperor's name to justify his own tyranny. The Black Templars were among the forces that assaulted the ecclesiarchal palace on Terra during the final phase of the apostasy's resolution. They fought alongside the Imperial Fists and the Soul Drinkers and the Firehawks, and elements of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the assault was everything the Templars are: direct, furious, committed to the point of recklessness, driven by a conviction that the target deserved destruction, and that the destruction was the Emperor's will. Vandyre fell. The Imperium reformed, and the Black Templars resumed the crusade, as they always do, turning away from the crisis that had drawn them in and directing their fury at whatever came next. The Black Crusades, the periodic assaults that the forces of chaos launch from the Eye of Terror, have been the most consistent thread in the Black Templars' 10,000-year war. Sigismund himself established the precedent by bringing a crusade fleet to the Cadian Gate, and the Templars have maintained a presence in or near the regions adjacent to the Eye throughout the millennia since. Not always a large presence, the chapter's commitments are spread too widely for a permanent garrison of significant strength, but a presence. Warriors who watch the Eye. Crusade fleets that patrol the routes along which chaos forces tend to move when they emerge. When Abaddon's Black Crusades have come, and they have come repeatedly, each one larger and more destructive than the last, the Black Templars have met them with the fury that the encounter between Sigismund's successors and Abaddon's followers has always produced. There is a personal quality to the Black Templars' war against the Black Legion that goes beyond the standard Astartes' commitment to fighting chaos. Abaddon killed Sigismund. The first High Marshal died at the despoiler's hand. Every Black Templar who fights the Black Legion carries that death as a debt that the Crusade has not yet fully repaid. The Nimbosa Crusade, in 790 M41, brought the Black Templars into conflict with the Tau, the expanding Xenos civilization whose measured diplomatic approach to galactic relations masks a territorial ambition that the Templars have never been willing to accommodate. The Templars and the Imperial Fists cooperated in the liberation of the world of Nimbosa from Tau occupation, and the campaign was notable both for its intensity — the casualties were heavy on both sides — and for the specific character of the Black Templars' prosecution of it. The Templars fought the Tau with a hatred that went past tactical necessity into something more visceral. The Tau are aliens. Aliens have no place in the Emperor's galaxy. The doctrine is simple. The violence that follows from it is comprehensive. Across these campaigns and hundreds of others, named and unnamed, recorded and forgotten, spread across the full breadth of the galaxy's geography, the Eternal Crusade has ground on. The consistency of it is the thing that distinguishes the Black Templars from every other chapter that has had a distinguished career in the Imperium's wars. Other chapters have fought many campaigns. No other chapter has fought one campaign that has lasted 10,000 years. The Ultramarines have their 500 worlds and their codex and their structured approach to the long defense of humanity. The Space Wolves have their sagas and their pack bonds and their ferocious independence. The Blood Angels have their curse and their beauty and their doomed nobility. The Black Templars have the Crusade. And the Crusade has not stopped. The Varadon Crusade in 987.M41 produced one of the moments that the Templars carry with a weight that they do not always display externally. The Shadow Wolves chapter was making its last stand on its homeworld, fighting a Tyranid incursion that had overwhelmed them. The Black Templars attempted to reach them. They fought through the Tyranid swarms, pushed toward the beleaguered chapter, tried to break through the chitinous wall between them and the warriors who needed them. They could not get through. The Shadow Wolves died. The last battle brother fell with his chapter banner still raised, his blade broken, his bolter empty. The Black Templars watched it happen from the edge of the engagement and could not prevent it. Grimaldus was there. Not yet the Reclusiarch, not yet the hero of anything. An apprentice to Reclusiarch Mordred, a young warrior watching a chapter die because the Imperium's response had not been fast enough and the enemy's numbers had been too great. The experience marked him. The experience marked the entire crusade that witnessed it. And the mark is visible in the intensity with which the Templars have since prosecuted campaigns against Tyrannid forces. The specific fury of warriors who have seen what the hive fleets leave behind, which is nothing. The crusade absorbs these moments. It absorbs victories and it absorbs failures, and it absorbs the grief that both produce, and it keeps moving, because the oath does not permit stopping, and the faith does not permit despair. The enemy the Templars could not reach at Varadin is replaced by the enemy they can reach tomorrow, and the fury that Varadin generated is directed at the new target with the same intensity that every target receives. This is what 10,000 years of war produces. Not wisdom, exactly. The Templars would not claim wisdom, and the claim would be contested if they made it. Something more like persistence refined to a philosophical absolute. The understanding that the war will not end, that the enemies will keep coming, that the Crusade's purpose is not to finish but to continue, and that the continuing is itself the victory. The galaxy has tried to stop them. It has killed their founder. It has bled their crusades. It has thrown every enemy available at them for 100 centuries. And the Black Templars are still here, still fighting, still crusading. The oath holds. A Black Templar's day does not begin with the sound of a horn or the ringing of a bell in a fortress monastery's great hall. It begins with the hum of a warship's engines, the vibration of a vessel in transit, and a prayer. The prayer is not optional. The Black Templar's devotional practice is as much a part of the warrior's daily life as the maintenance of his armor or the practice of his martial skills. Before the warrior eats, before he trains, before he reviews the intelligence for the next engagement or checks the condition of his war gear, he prays. The prayer is not the rote observance that some chapters perform as a matter of institutional habit. The words recited from memory without particular engagement. Black Templar prayer is intense, personal, and deeply felt. The warrior is speaking to his God. He believes his God is listening. The prayer is the first act of the day, because it establishes the context for everything that follows. The day belongs to the Emperor. The warrior's strength belongs to the Emperor. And whatever the day requires of him will be done in the Emperor's service. The training that follows the prayer is focused on close combat, to a degree that would look imbalanced to a chapter with a more diversified tactical doctrine. Blade work. The chainsword and the power sword and the combat knife and the improvised weapon that the warrior may need to employ when everything else has been lost. The practice bouts between initiates are not gentle. They are full contact engagements with real weapons at reduced power, conducted with an intensity that produces injuries and is intended to. A warrior who has not been hit in training is a warrior who will be surprised when he is hit in combat. and surprise is a luxury the Black Templars do not extend to themselves. Ranged weapons training follows, because the Templars use bolters and they use them effectively, but the emphasis and the time allocation reflect the chapter's priorities. The bolter is mastered, the blade is perfected. The neophyte's training day is different from the initiate's in one critical respect. The neophyte trains with his mentor, not in a classroom, not in a structured program with defined learning objectives and scheduled assessments. The neophyte fights alongside his initiate in the training exercises as he will fight alongside him in the field. And the training is the fighting, and the fighting is the training, and the distinction between the two is deliberately blurred, because the chapter does not believe the distinction is useful. The chaplains are present throughout. In a codex-compliant chapter, the chaplain's role is important but circumscribed, maintaining morale, conducting the chapter's religious observances, monitoring the warrior's spiritual health. In the Black Templars, the chaplain is central to everything. He leads the prayers, he supervises the training, he delivers the sermons that the warriors receive not as institutional messaging, but as the word of the Emperor transmitted through the voice of his servant. The chaplain's authority in a Black Templars crusade is second only to the marshals. And in matters of faith, which, for the Templars, is most matters, the chaplain's judgment carries a weight that the marshal himself must consider carefully before overriding. The relationship between marshal and chaplain is one of the more interesting dynamics in the chapter's internal politics. The marshal commands the crusade militarily. The chaplain commands the crusade spiritually. The two authorities overlap extensively because the Templars do not separate war from worship, and the decisions the marshal makes about where to fight and how to fight are inseparable from the decisions the chaplain makes about what the Emperor requires. A marshal and a chaplain who are in agreement produce a crusade of frightening coherence. A marshal and a chaplain who are not in agreement produce a crisis that the chapter's institutional structure does not have an obvious mechanism for resolving. The resolution, when it occurs, typically favors the chaplain, not because the institutional rules say it should. The marshal is formally the senior officer, but because the chaplain speaks with the Emperor's voice, and in a chapter that places the Emperor's will above all other considerations, the voice that claims to transmit that will carries the weightier authority. Marshals who have attempted to overrule their chaplains on matters the chaplain has declared to be matters of faith have generally found that the warriors of the crusade follow the chaplain. This is not a weakness in the chapter's command structure. It is a feature. The Templars believe that the Emperor's will should govern their actions, and the chaplain is the institution's designated interpreter of the Emperor's will. A command structure that subordinates the interpreter of God's will to the military commander would be, in the Templars' theology, a command structure that subordinates God to convenience. The Templars do not subordinate God. Between engagements, the warriors of a crusade fleet occupy themselves with the maintenance of their equipment, the study of the enemy they expect to face next, and the devotional practices that fill whatever time the crusade's operational tempo does not consume. There is no leisure in the conventional sense. The Black Templars do not have a concept of rest that exists independently of the preparation for the next fight. Their rest is prayer. Their recreation is practice. Their social bonds are the bonds of warriors who fight beside each other and who process the fighting through the shared experience of devotion. This produces a culture that outsiders find austere. Not joyless, the Templars experience joy. The specific fierce joy of warriors who are doing exactly what they believe they were made to do, and who feel the Emperor's presence in the doing. But austere, stripped of the ornament and the variety that most human cultures develop when given enough time. The Black Templars have had 10,000 years, and what 10,000 years of crusade has produced is not a rich and varied culture, but a deep and narrow one. The same faith, the same fury, the same commitment, refined and refined and refined until what remains is pure. Whether purity of this kind is a strength or a limitation is a question that the Templars do not ask, because the question implies that an alternative to purity is worth considering. It is not. Not for the Black Templars. For them, purity is the point. The chaplains of the Black Templars are the most important officers in the chapter, and this is a statement that most other chapters would make about their captains or their chapter master. The Templars' chaplains, called reclusiarchs in their senior ranks, the title that Grimaldus holds, are not simply the spiritual overseers that chaplains are in other chapters. They are the keepers of the flame, the warriors whose voices carry the litanies that sustain the Crusade's faith, whose presence on the battlefield is not advisory but essential, whose judgment on matters of doctrine and devotion carries an authority that the chapter's military hierarchy must defer to, because the hierarchy recognizes that what the chaplain maintains is more important than what the marshal commands. Every codex-compliant chapter has chaplains. They monitor the warriors' morale. They conduct the chapter's rituals. They serve as the institutional memory of the chapter's history and traditions, the figures who connect the current generation to the warriors who came before. These functions are important, and the chaplains who fulfill them in other chapters are valued accordingly. The Black Templars' chaplains do all of this, and they do something more. They maintain the faith that makes the crusade possible. Without the faith, the crusade is not a crusade, it is an extended military campaign. And extended military campaigns end. They end because the political justification for them expires, or because the resources required to sustain them run out, or because the warriors fighting them grow tired and the institution's capacity to replace the tired warriors with fresh ones is exceeded by the rate at which the tiredness spreads. The Black Templars' crusade has not ended because the faith has not ended. And the faith has not ended because the chaplains have not let it end. They are the warriors whose duty is to ensure that the fire Sigismund ignited 10,000 years ago does not go out. That every initiate and every neophyte and every marshal and every high marshal burns with the same conviction that drove the first high marshal to swear the oath that began everything. This is an extraordinary responsibility, and it produces extraordinary men. The chaplain who serves the Black Templars must be, first and foremost, a genuine believer, not a performer of faith, not a warrior who can deliver a convincing sermon and maintain the forms of devotion without the substance. A genuine believer, a man who feels the Emperor's presence with the same certainty that he feels the deck beneath his feet, who can transmit that certainty to warriors in the middle of a losing battle, who can make the faith real at the moment when reality is making the faith hardest to hold. Grimaldus is the exemplar. His performance at Hellshriek was not simply military, it was spiritual. He sustained the faith of his warriors and the faith of the human defenders around them through weeks of grinding siege. And the sustaining was not done through speeches or administrative motivation, but through the force of a belief so absolute that it radiated from him like heat. Warriors who fought beside Grimaldus at Hellshriek describe the experience in terms that other Space Marines would find uncomfortably religious. They felt the Emperor's presence through Grimaldus. The chaplain was not simply a warrior who believed. He was a conduit, the point through which the Emperor's will entered the battle and shaped it. Whether this is literally true, whether the Emperor's psychic presence actually moves through his chaplains in the way the Templars believe, or whether it is the psychological effect of a charismatic leader's absolute conviction on warriors who share his framework of belief, is a question that the available evidence does not cleanly resolve. What the evidence does show is the effect. Warriors who fight under a Black Templars chaplain fight harder, sustain their commitment longer, accept losses that would break the morale of warriors serving under a less compelling spiritual authority. The chaplains are also the chapter's internal police. Not in the ordinary military discipline sense. That function is handled by the command structure in the same way it is handled in any military organization. The chaplains police the faith. They watch for doubt. They watch for hesitation. They watch for the gradual cooling of commitment that can happen even in the most devoted warrior when the crusade grinds on long enough and the victories are hard enough to come by. A warrior who doubts is not punished in the physical sense. He is counseled in the intense and personal way that Templar chaplains counsel, the warrior and the chaplain alone in the chapel. The chaplain's skull, helm as close to the warrior's face as the conversation requires. The doubt is heard. The doubt is understood, and then the doubt is addressed, not by argument, because the Templars do not argue about faith, but by prayer, by the reaffirmation of the truth that the doubt is attempting to erode. If the prayer works, if the warrior emerges from the counseling with his faith restored, the incident is forgotten. The Templars do not hold doubt against a warrior who overcomes it. The overcoming is itself an act of faith, and the warrior who has faced doubt and defeated it is, in some respects, stronger in his conviction than the warrior who has never doubted at all. If the prayer does not work, if the doubt persists, if the warrior cannot recover the faith that the crusade requires, the situation is managed with the quiet severity that the chapter brings to all matters of spiritual failure. The details are not discussed outside the reclusium. The chaplains carry this weight. They carry the weight of every warrior's faith, and the weight of every warrior's doubt, and the weight of the difference between the two, and the knowledge that their ability to maintain the distinction is the thing that keeps the crusade alive. It is not a comfortable burden. It is the most important one the chapter carries, and the warriors who bear it are the warriors the chapter cannot do without. Grimaldus emerged from a collapsed temple carrying sacred relics. The symbolism is precise. The chaplain carries the sacred things through the destruction. That is what chaplains do. That is all chaplains do. And without them, the Black Templars would be a chapter of angry warriors in black armor, fighting because they were made to fight. With them, the Black Templars are a crusade, and the crusade is the most important thing in the galaxy that the chapter's faith can recognize. The Black Templars are among the most visible Space Marine chapters in the galaxy, and their visibility produces reactions in ordinary humans that other chapters do not. Most Space Marines are encountered by civilians at a distance. A chapter deploys to a war zone, fights its campaign, and withdraws. The interaction between the Astartes and the human population they are defending is mediated by the Imperial Guard, by the administrative apparatus that manages the interface between the superhuman warriors and the people they fight for. The civilians see the Space Marines as angels of death who arrive, destroy the enemy, and depart. The impression is powerful but brief. The Black Templars leave a different impression, because the crusade does not depart the same way a campaign does. When a Black Templar crusade liberates a world, it does not simply kill the enemy and move on. It establishes a chapter keep. It recruits from the local population. It leaves a permanent mark on the world, physical, cultural, spiritual, that persists after the crusade fleet has moved on to the next engagement. The chapter keep is staffed by warriors who are not active combatants in the current crusade, either because they are training the next generation of recruits, or because the chapter's internal management has placed them in a garrison role. These warriors interact with the local population in ways that most Space Marines never do. And the interaction is shaped by the Templars' theology. The warriors who garrison a chapter keep do not simply maintain a military facility. They maintain a shrine. The keep is as much a temple as it is a barracks, and the faith that the warriors carry bleeds into the population around them. Worlds that host Black Templars chapter keeps develop over time a religious culture that is more intense than the imperial standard. The Templars' brand of faith, personal, fervent, intolerant of deviation, influences the local population's relationship with the Emperor's worship. Communities that were tepid in their devotion before the Templars arrived become zealous afterward. Not because the Templars force conversion, but because the example of warriors who genuinely believe, who live their faith with an intensity that ordinary humans find both inspiring and terrifying, reshapes what the local population understands devotion to mean. This effect is not always welcome. Imperial governors who manage populations through the standard apparatus of the Ministorum sometimes find that a Black Templars chapter keep on their world has created a population that is more devout than the governor can comfortably manage. Devout populations question the governor's commitment to the Emperor's will. Devout populations hold their leaders to the standard that the Templars have modeled. And devout populations, when they decide that their leaders have fallen short of the standard, can become the kind of problem that the governor needs the Templars' help to contain, which creates a dependency that some governors find deeply uncomfortable. The ecclesiarchy's local priests find the dynamic even more complex. A population that has been influenced by the Black Templars' brand of faith is a population that expects more from its clergy than the standard imperial homilies. The Templars' warriors pray with a fervor that makes the parish priest's weekly service look pallid by comparison. And a population that has seen what real devotion looks like, the kind that chains weapons to wrists and charges into death without flinching, is a population that has very little patience for the kind of comfortable institutional religiosity that most ecclesiarchal parishes provide. In extreme cases, this has produced local religious movements that the ecclesiarchy regards as heterodox, communities that have taken the Templars' example and extended it into areas of practice that the Templars themselves did not intend, and that the ecclesiarchy's doctrinal oversight cannot easily manage. Flagellant cults, penitential movements, groups that interpret the Emperor's service as requiring the kind of physical self-punishment that the Templars' own warrior culture produces through combat, but that civilians must simulate through other means. The Black Templars do not intentionally create these movements. They are, when they notice them, mildly puzzled by them. The Templars' devotion is expressed through war. And the idea that civilians would try to replicate the devotion through self-harm is not something the chapter's culture accounts for, but the movements exist, and they are a consequence of what the chapter is, and the ecclesiarchy and the Inquisition both track them with the attention that any manifestation of popular religious intensity deserves in a galaxy where religious intensity is a pathway that chaos has exploited before. For the civilians who live on worlds the Black Templars have touched, the Crusade is not an abstract military operation happening somewhere in the void. It is a presence, a permanent, visible, spiritually transformative presence that has reshaped what their world understands about the Emperor and about what service to him looks like. The Templar who fought for their world, and the Templar who garrisons the chapter keep that was established after the fight, are both real to them in a way that other Space Marines, distant, brief, mythological, are not. This is power of a different kind from military power. It is cultural power, theological power, the power to change what people believe and how they act by the force of example, sustained across decades of visible devotion on the part of warriors whose commitment is not in question, because the commitment is expressed in everything they do. The Imperium has never fully reckoned with this power. It is content to deploy the Black Templars as a military asset, to point the crusade at the next enemy and let the fury do its work. But the crusade leaves marks that military deployment does not, and the marks accumulate, and the populations that carry them are different from the populations that don't. Whether the difference is desirable depends on what you think the Imperium needs from its people. More faith? The Templars provide that. More intensity of purpose? The Templars model that. More willingness to sacrifice, to fight, to endure without comfort and without doubt? The Black Templars have never asked whether the galaxy wanted what they bring. They bring it. The galaxy adjusts. When Roboute Guilliman returned to the Imperium, when a living Primarch walked the galaxy again for the first time in 10,000 years, the Black Templars faced a moment of crisis of faith that the chapter's history had not prepared them for. Guilliman brought with him the Primaris Space Marines, new warriors, larger and stronger, designed by the Archmagos Belisarius Call during 10,000 years of secret work on the Emperor's own instruction. The Primaris were an upgrade to the Astartes template, and Guilliman was distributing them to every loyal chapter in the Imperium as reinforcement for the wars that the Great Rift's opening had made catastrophically more difficult. Many observers expected the Black Templars to refuse the Primaris. The logic was straightforward. The Black Templars distrust everything that smells of the Psyche, and the Primaris program was inextricable from the Mechanicum's deepest biological sciences. From the manipulation of gene seed at levels that the Templars' theology regarded with suspicion. The Templars had spent 10,000 years perfecting their approach to war through faith and fury, and the arrival of warriors who were better by design rather than by devotion, who were faster and stronger because they were engineered rather than because the Emperor had made them so through the traditional gene seed, cut against the grain of the chapter's understanding of what made a warrior worthy. And the Primaris came from Guilliman, The Templars' relationship with the Lord of the Ultramarines had always been complicated, because Guilliman was the author of the Codex Astartes, the document the Templars had spent 10,000 years conspicuously not fully complying with, and because the Ultramarines' philosophical approach to war was everything the Templars were not: rational, measured, codified. The idea that the architect of institutional restraint was now distributing warriors to the chapter that had built its identity around the rejection of institutional restraint contained a contradiction that the Templars' theology would need to resolve before the Primaris could be accepted. Guilliman understood this. He understood it well enough that he chose to deliver the Primaris to the Black Templars in person, which tells you something about the returned Primarch's political intelligence. He knew that sending a torchbearer fleet without his personal presence risked a confrontation that nobody needed. He met Helbrecht aboard the Eternal Crusader. What passed between the returned Primarch and the High Marshal of the Black Templars is not fully documented in the available records, but the outcome is known. Helbrecht accepted the Primaris. The reasons are instructive. Helbrecht was not simply overawed by the presence of a Primarch. The Black Templars do not overawe easily, and Helbrecht's personal courage is not the kind that would bend under the weight of another man's reputation, however legendary. He accepted the Primaris because Guilliman framed the acceptance in the terms the Templars' theology could accommodate. The Primaris were not Guilliman's warriors. They were the Emperor's. Caul had built them on the Emperor's instruction given before the heresy's end, before the Golden Throne, before the 10,000 years of silence that had followed. The Primaris were the Emperor's plan, initiated by the Emperor's will, completed in the Emperor's service. To refuse them was to refuse what the Emperor had ordered. The Black Templars do not refuse what the Emperor has ordered. The acceptance was not without conditions. Helbrecht insisted, and Guilliman, to his credit, agreed that the Primaris warriors integrated into the Black Templars would be Black Templars. Not Primaris first and Templars second. Templars first. Primaris incidentally. They would take the oaths. They would learn the litanies. They would fight in the Templars' way, at the Templars' range, with the Templars' fury. The biological enhancement was welcome. The cultural override was not. The integration has proceeded on those terms. Primaris warriors who join the Black Templars are put through the same formation process as every other recruit, assigned to an initiate, taught to fight in the close assault, steeped in the chapter's faith and fury until the biological difference between Primaris and Firstborn is less important than the shared identity of the Crusade. Helbrecht himself has undergone the Rubicon Primaris, the dangerous procedure that transforms a Firstborn warrior into a Primaris one. That he chose to do so is, in the chapter's internal politics, the most significant endorsement the Primaris program could have received. If the High Marshal has accepted the transformation is sanctioned. The theology accommodates it. The Emperor wills it. Whether the Emperor wills it, or whether Helbrecht made a pragmatic decision and dressed it in the language of faith, is a question the Templars would not appreciate having asked. The answer, for them, is the same in either case. The Emperor's will and Helbrecht's decision are not separate things, because the Emperor's will moves through the High Marshal's decisions, and the decision was correct because the Emperor would not have permitted a wrong one. This is circular reasoning. The Black Templars do not mind circular reasoning when the circle passes through the Emperor. The Primaris warriors who now serve in the Black Templars' Crusade fleets are as fierce, as devoted, and as committed to the close assault as any firstborn warrior in the chapter's history. The additional physical capability that the Primaris template provides, the greater size, the enhanced organ implants, the improved durability, serves the Templars' preferred approach. A larger warrior who can absorb more punishment on the approach and deliver more force at the point of impact is a warrior whose biological enhancement directly supports the chapter's doctrinal emphasis on the melee engagement. The Primaris are Templars. They have chained their weapons. They have sworn the vows. They have received the Emperor's blessing through the chapter's rituals, and they fight with the faith and the fury that the rituals are designed to produce. The theological crisis resolved itself, as most crises do in the Black Templars' experience, when you apply enough faith to them. The Black Templars fight alongside other chapters more frequently than most, because the Crusade takes them everywhere, and the galaxy's wars rarely wait for a single chapter's strength to be sufficient. The relationships these joint operations produce are complicated by the same qualities that make the Templars effective: the faith, the fury, the refusal to moderate their approach. The Imperial Fists are the parent chapter, and the relationship is what you would expect between a parent whose character was built around discipline and patience, and a successor whose character was built around fury and faith. There is respect. The gene seed is shared. The legacy of Dawn connects them, but the Imperial Fists regard the Black Templars with the quality of concern that a builder feels watching someone use his tools as weapons. The sense that what was built for one purpose has been turned to another, and that the turning has produced something powerful but not entirely what was intended. The Black Templars regard the Imperial Fists with the respect that shared blood demands, and the mild impatience that warriors of passion feel toward warriors of restraint. The Fists build walls. The Templars storm them. Both are necessary. Neither fully understands why the other has chosen the emphasis it has. Joint operations between the two chapters work, because both are professional enough to set the philosophical differences aside when the enemy is present. The Fists hold. The Templars advance. The combination is devastating when it is coordinated well, and the chapters have enough shared history to coordinate it well when the situation demands. The Space Wolves produce a more natural alliance. The Wolves' character, fierce, independent, built around personal loyalty and warrior honor rather than institutional compliance, resonates with the Templars in ways that the more cerebral chapters' characters do not. The Wolves fight like the Templars fight, up close with fury, with a commitment to the engagement that goes past what tactical calculation would recommend. The two chapters understand each other at the level of instinct even when they do not understand each other at the level of theology. The gap in their faiths is real. The Wolves are not believers in the way the Templars are. The Emperor is the All-Father in the Wolves' mythology, a figure of reverence, but not of worship in the ecclesiarchal sense. The Templars' absolute devotional faith in the Emperor as God does not map onto the Wolves' more personal familial relationship with the same figure. But in the field, when the fighting is close and the fury is high, the gap closes. What matters is that both chapters throw themselves at the enemy without reservation, and the reasons for the throwing are less important than the fact of it. The Ultramarines are the most difficult relationship the Templars maintain with a loyalist chapter, and the difficulty is rooted in the Codex. The Ultramarines wrote the Codex Astartes, or rather their Primarch did, and the Ultramarines regard it as the foundational document of what the Adeptus Astartes should be. The Black Templars regard it as a set of guidelines that they observe when convenient and ignore when not. And the Ultramarines' reaction to this is the specific discomfort of scholars watching practitioners disregard the scholarship. It does not help that the Templars are successful. If the Black Templars' deviation from the Codex produced poor outcomes, the Ultramarines could point to the deviation and say this is why the Codex exists. But the deviation produces excellent outcomes, which means the Ultramarines must either acknowledge that the Codex is not the only path to effectiveness, a concession their institutional identity struggles to make, or argue that effectiveness alone does not justify deviation, which is a harder argument to win in a galaxy that is perpetually on fire. The tension is managed rather than resolved. The two chapters serve alongside each other when the situation requires it, and the professionalism on both sides is sufficient to prevent the philosophical disagreement from degrading operational effectiveness. But the disagreement exists, and neither side is inclined to pretend it doesn't. With the ecclesiarchy, the relationship is warmer than with most chapters, but not without its own complexities. The ecclesiarchy appreciates the Templars' devotion, a Space Marine chapter that genuinely worships the Emperor, as God is a rare and valuable thing in the ecclesiarchy's theological landscape. But the Templars' brand of worship is not always comfortable for the institutional church. The Templars are true believers, and true believers tend to follow their faith wherever it leads, which is not always where the ecclesiarchy would prefer the faithful to go. A Black Templars crusade that arrives at a shrine world and finds it insufficiently defended may decide to stay and fortify the world's spiritual defenses in ways the ecclesiarchy did not request. A crusade that encounters what it judges to be heretical practice in an ecclesiarchal institution may address the heresy directly, without the kind of procedural deference that the ecclesiarchy's own internal governance mechanisms would prefer. The Templars' faith does not pass through institutional channels on its way to action. It goes directly from belief to violence, and the institutions that exist between those 2 points sometimes find themselves bypassed. The Inquisition's relationship with the Black Templars has varied across the millennia from cooperative to hostile, depending on which Inquisitor and which Templar. The Templars' hatred of Psychers has put them in conflict with Inquisitors who employ Psychers as part of their retinues. The Templars' enthusiasm for purging witches and mutants has sometimes overlapped uncomfortably with the Inquisition's own programs, and sometimes run ahead of them. And the Templars' numbers, the 6,000-strong elephant in the room that nobody officially acknowledges, remain a matter of ongoing inquisitorial interest that has not yet produced action, but that has not stopped producing concern. What saves the relationship from collapse is the same thing that saves all of the Templars' relationships from collapse. The Crusade produces results that the Imperium needs. Whatever the theological disagreements, whatever the institutional frictions, whatever the concerns about a chapter that operates more like a legion and worships with more intensity than the institutions charged with managing worship are entirely comfortable with. The Black Templars fight the Emperor's enemies. They fight them constantly, in multiple theaters, with a ferocity and a commitment that the Imperium cannot easily replace. And in a galaxy where the enemies never stop coming, the force that never stops fighting is the force that nobody can afford to challenge. The Great Rift changed everything. For the Black Templars, it changed nothing. This is the paradox at the heart of the chapter's experience of the era Indomitus. The galaxy has been torn in half. The Astronomican's light does not reach the dark side. Billions of people have been isolated from everything the Imperium provided. The forces of chaos pour through the wound in reality with a freedom they have not enjoyed since the heresy. The strategic situation is, by any sober assessment, the worst it has been since the Emperor was interred on the Golden Throne. And the Black Templars were already fighting, were already crusading, were already dispersed across the galaxy in multiple simultaneous campaigns. The Great Rift did not create a new situation for the Templars, it intensified the existing one. The enemies they were already fighting are now fighting harder. The regions they were already crusading through are now more dangerous. The wars they were already waging have become more desperate. The chapter's response was not to consolidate and defend. The response that many chapters adopted, pulling back to fortified positions to weather the storm. The Black Templars' response was to attack harder. The Noctis Aeterna, the period of warp storms that followed the Rift's opening, when the Astronomican went dark and the galaxy was plunged into confusion, produced a wave of mutation and heresy across the Imperium Sanctus. The Templars' answer to mutation and heresy has always been the same. They purged it. Crusade after crusade reoriented toward the internal threats that the Noctis Aeterna had enabled, and the purging was conducted with the thoroughness that only the Black Templars' combination of zealotry and numbers can produce. Not everyone appreciated the thoroughness. Worlds that had survived the Noctis Aeterna's horrors, that had endured the period of warp-spawned nightmares and come through it, scarred but intact, found themselves subjected to a Black Templars purge that treated the surviving population with the same suspicion the chapter directed at the things the population had survived. Mutations that were the result of warp exposure and that might have faded with time were treated as permanent corruption, requiring permanent solutions. Communities that had developed unorthodox practices during the period of isolation, practices that were survival mechanisms rather than genuine heresies, were judged by the Templars' doctrinal standard rather than by the circumstances that had produced them. This is the cost of zealotry applied without restraint. The Black Templars do not modulate their response to accommodate circumstance. The witch is the witch, the mutant is the mutant, the heretic is the heretic. The context in which the witch or the mutant or the heretic appeared does not change what they are, and what they are determines what happens to them. The Inquisition watched this with mixed feelings. The purges addressed real threats, genuine corruption that the warp storms had deposited in the Imperium's population. But the purges also damaged communities that the Inquisition's own analysis judged to be salvageable. And the damage was permanent in ways that the original corruption might not have been. Meanwhile, in the Imperium Nihilus, the dark half cut off from the light, Black Templars' crusade fleets that had been operating when the Rift opened found themselves isolated, cut off from the High Marshal, from the wider chapter, from the Astronomican that made reliable warp travel possible. Several crusades vanished entirely during this period, their fate unknown. The crusades that survived operated as they had always operated, independently, under their marshal's command, fighting whatever enemies the dark presented. The isolation did not change their mission. The mission was the same as it had always been. Prosecute the Emperor's war against everything that stood against him. The conditions had changed, the warp was wilder, the enemies were more numerous, the support infrastructure was gone, but the mission was unchanged. And the Black Templars have never needed comfortable conditions to execute their mission. This is the quality that makes them valuable beyond measure in the current era. Other chapters, deprived of their support networks and cut off from the Imperium's broader strategic direction, might hesitate, might consolidate, might wait for orders that cannot arrive. The Black Templars do not wait. They do not need orders. Their orders were given 10,000 years ago and have not been rescinded. They fight, they crusade, they pursue the Emperor's enemies wherever those enemies present themselves, and the absence of external guidance does not slow them, because external guidance has never been the thing that drove them. The faith drives them, and the faith does not require the Astronomicon to function. New chapter keeps were raised on worlds the Crusades liberated during this period. New recruits were drawn from populations that the Crusades had saved. The Eternal Crusade, even in the worst conditions the galaxy had produced since its founding, continued to do what it had always done: fight, expand, convert, and keep moving. Robert Guillemon's return and the Indomitus Crusade brought the Primaris reinforcements and a degree of strategic coordination that the dispersed Crusade fleets had been operating without. Helbrecht, restored to communication with the returned Primarch and the wider Imperium, directed the Black Templars' response to the new strategic picture with the same combination of faith and fury that the chapter has always brought. He also, at Guillemon's urging, redirected several Crusade fleets to the defense of ecclesiarchal worlds that were under threat. This was notable because Guillemon's authority over the Black Templars was not automatic. The Templars answer to the High Marshal, and the High Marshal answers to the Emperor, and Guillemon is not the Emperor. But the returned Primarch's request was framed as a reminder of duty rather than an exercise of authority, and Helbrecht's faith, which had been rekindled by the signs and portents of the current era, by the return of a Primarch and the Primaris warriors who came with him, made the redirection feel like obedience to the Emperor's will expressed through Guillemon's voice. Whether it was obedience or pragmatism dressed in theological language does not matter. The Crusade fleets went. The ecclesiarchal worlds were defended. The Crusade continued. In the current moment, the Black Templars are operating at the highest tempo in their history. More Crusade fleets are active than at any point since the treachery of Dalmark. The threats they face are more numerous and more varied than at any point since the heresy. The galaxy is darker, harder, more dangerous. And the Black Templars are brighter. Their faith burns hotter in the darkness. Their fury intensifies when the enemies multiply. Their crusade accelerates when the galaxy tries to slow it down. This is what they were made for. Not the quiet times, not the intervals of relative peace. The darkness, the crisis, the moment when everything the Imperium has built is threatened and the only response that matters is the willingness to fight without reservation, without calculation, without the kind of measured strategic response that preserves resources at the cost of commitment. The Black Templars do not preserve resources. They spend them. All of them. Against everything. Forever, the Eternal Crusade does not come without cost. And the cost is not measured only in the warriors who fall. There is a price to never stopping. A price to building an entire institutional identity around the proposition that the war will never end, and that the warriors who fight it should never expect an interval of peace. Other chapters fight their wars and return to their fortress monasteries, and the return is part of how the warriors process what they have experienced. The campaign recedes. The intensity diminishes. The warrior's mind, even a transhuman mind augmented to resist the psychological effects of sustained combat, has the opportunity to do whatever the equivalent of healing is for a being whose capacity for trauma has been engineered but not eliminated. The Black Templars do not have this opportunity. Not because it is denied to them, no one forbids them from resting, but because the Crusade's rhythm does not accommodate it. The interval between one campaign and the next is the transit time between operational theaters, and that transit time is filled with preparation and prayer and training, and the other activities that the chapter's culture mandates. There is no empty time. There is no period in which the warrior's mind is not engaged with either the war he has just fought or the war he is about to fight. This produces warriors who are, by some metrics, more resilient than those of other chapters. Warriors who have been hardened by constant exposure to the conditions that other chapters experience periodically. A Black Templar veteran has seen more continuous combat than most warriors in the Imperium, and the experience has either broken him or made him something that cannot easily be broken. But the ones who break do break. The Black Templars do not acknowledge this publicly, because the acknowledgement would be inconsistent with the chapter's theology of absolute commitment. A warrior who breaks under the weight of the Crusade's demands is a warrior whose faith was insufficient, and insufficiency of faith is not something the chapter's institutional culture can accommodate without undermining the premise that faith is the answer to everything the Crusade demands. What actually happens to warriors who reach the limit of what the Crusade's intensity can sustain is not well documented. Some are absorbed into the chapter's logistical and administrative functions, the shipboard roles that every fleet-based chapter requires but that are not the front-line combat duties the chapter glorifies. Some are assigned to chapter keeps, where the operational tempo is lower and the warrior can serve without being subjected to the constant forward pressure of the active crusade. Some die in battle before the breaking becomes visible, and the death is interpreted as martyrdom rather than as the collapse of a warrior who had reached the end of what he could endure. The chapter's chaplains watch for this. Part of the chaplain's role, the part that is not often discussed in the accounts that emphasize the chaplain's inspirational and theological functions, is the identification of warriors whose commitment is beginning to fail. Not warriors who have lost their faith necessarily, warriors whose bodies and minds have absorbed all the combat they can absorb, who are approaching a threshold beyond which the next engagement will not produce a functional warrior but a broken one. The chaplain sees this before the warrior himself does, because the chaplain is trained to see it and because the warrior's own theology prevents him from recognizing it in himself. What the chaplain does with this observation varies. Some redirect the warrior, some intensify the prayer regimen, on the theory that what appears to be breaking is actually insufficient faith, and that more faith is the remedy. Some, quietly and without formal procedure, arrange for the warrior to be placed in a position where the forward pressure is reduced, without the warrior understanding that a decision about his condition has been made. None of this is acknowledged. The Black Templars do not have a formal process for managing combat fatigue, because they do not formally acknowledge that combat fatigue is a thing that happens to warriors of sufficient faith. The informal management happens anyway, because the chaplains are practical men despite their spiritual convictions, and a warrior who breaks in the middle of an engagement endangers his brothers in a way that the chaplain's duty to the crusade cannot tolerate. The neophytes are the most vulnerable, because the neophyte system throws developing warriors into the full intensity of the crusade before their augmented physiology has completed the hardening process that other chapters' scout company training provides in a more controlled environment. A neophyte who fights beside his initiate in a major engagement is experiencing combat at a level that would overwhelm many fully developed warriors. And the neophyte's biological and psychological development has not yet produced the full complement of the resilience that a mature Astartes carries. The attrition among neophytes reflects this. The Black Templars lose a higher proportion of their developing warriors than chapters that use the scout company model, and the losses are not uniformly physical. Some neophytes survive the combat but do not survive what the combat does to their developing minds. These cases are managed with the same quiet pragmatism that the chaplains bring to their management of veteran warriors' limits, and with the same formal silence about the phenomenon's existence. The crusade sustains this. Not comfortably, not without the cost that the silence conceals, but sustainably. 10,000 years of evidence suggest that the chapter's model works, that the warriors it produces are, on the whole, effective and committed and capable of sustaining the crusade's demands across careers that span centuries. The cost is real. The cost is managed. The crusade continues, whether the cost could be reduced, whether a less intense operational tempo, a less total commitment to permanent war, a more honest acknowledgement of what the crusade does to the warriors who fight it, would produce a chapter that was more effective rather than less effective, is a question the Black Templars have never asked. Not because the answer frightens them, because the question is irrelevant. The Emperor requires the crusade. The crusade requires everything. Everything is what the Templars give. The cost is the cost, and the cost is acceptable, because the alternative, stopping, is not available. There is a question that the Black Templars raise by their existence, and it is a question that the Imperium has never comfortably answered. Is faith sufficient? The Imperium contains many kinds of warriors. Warriors whose effectiveness is grounded in tactical sophistication and the careful application of doctrine. Warriors whose effectiveness flows from genetic enhancement and the specific qualities of their Primarch's gene seed. Warriors whose effectiveness is institutional, the product of 10,000 years of accumulated experience, maintained through the traditions and systems that their chapter has developed. The Black Templars propose something different. Their effectiveness, in their own understanding, is grounded in faith. Not in gene seed, not in doctrine, not in institutional memory, in the absolute burning, uncompromising belief that the Emperor is God and that the war they fight is his war and that he sustains them in the fighting. The gene seed provides the physical foundation. The training provides the martial skill. But the thing that makes a Black Templar what he is, the thing that takes the physical capability and the trained skill and turns them into the crusading fury that has not stopped for 10,000 years, is the faith. If this is true, if faith is genuinely the engine that has sustained the longest crusade in human history and produced one of the most effective fighting forces in the galaxy, then the implications for the Imperium are significant, because the Imperium's institutional management of faith is, in general, a mess. The ecclesiarchy administers the emperor's worship with the bureaucratic competence of an institution that has been doing administrative religion for millennia. But the quality of the faith that the administration produces is, by the Black Templars' standard, dilute. The average imperial citizen worships the emperor because the alternative is not worshipping the emperor, and the alternative carries consequences. The average space marine honors the emperor because the chapter's traditions require it. Neither of these is what the Black Templars mean when they say faith. The Black Templars mean the thing that makes a warrior chain his weapon to his wrist and charge into a wall of fire because he believes the emperor will see him through. The thing that makes a chaplain stand in the rubble of a collapsing temple and not doubt. The thing that makes a chapter sustain a crusade for 10,000 years without pausing. Because the alternative to the crusade is a galaxy in which the emperor's enemies are not being fought. And that galaxy is not acceptable. Whether this quality of faith is available to the wider Imperium, whether it could be cultivated, reproduced, distributed, is a question that the ecclesiarchy has studied and the Inquisition has studied, and that neither institution has arrived at a comfortable answer to. The Black Templars' faith is not transferable. It is not a technique. It is not a doctrine that can be taught. It is the product of a chapter culture that has been building for 10,000 years, maintained by institutions, the chaplains, the vows, the emperor's champion tradition, the ritual of the crusade itself, that exist nowhere else in the Imperium. You cannot bottle it. You cannot export it. You can only watch it and wonder whether what you are watching is the most magnificent thing in the Imperium or the most frightening. Because the other side of the question, the side that the Templars' admirers prefer not to examine too closely, is what faith of this intensity does when it is wrong. Not wrong about the Emperor. The Emperor is real. His power is real. The Golden Throne sustains the Astronomicon and holds the gate against the warp. And denying the Emperor's existence would be denying the evidence of the galaxy's continued function. The Templars are not wrong about the basic fact of the Emperor, but they may be wrong about what the Emperor wants. The Emperor who walked the galaxy during the Great Crusade did not want to be worshipped. He said so. Repeatedly, the imperial truth was an explicit rejection of divinity, an insistence that the universe operated according to natural laws rather than supernatural ones, and that treating a powerful being as a god was exactly the kind of thinking that produced chaos. The Black Templars worship him anyway. They have decided that the Emperor's stated position on his own divinity was either incorrect or outdated, or that the situation has changed sufficiently since the heresy that what the Emperor said before no longer applies. And they have built 10,000 years of crusade on that decision. If they are right, the crusade is the most important thing happening in the Imperium. The Emperor's true soldiers, fighting his true war, sustained by his true will. If they are wrong, the crusade is 10,000 years of misdirected fury, sustained by our error of faith that the warriors who carry it are constitutionally incapable of recognizing, because their faith is too absolute to accommodate the possibility that faith itself might be the problem. This is the question. The Imperium has never answered it. The Inquisition has never answered it. The returned Guilliman who knew the Emperor personally and who knows what the Emperor said about his own divinity has not answered it. Not because he does not have a position, but because answering it would require challenging the Black Templars' theology in a way that would produce a confrontation the Imperium cannot afford. So the question stands, unanswered, unresolved, and the crusade continues regardless, because the Black Templars do not need the question answered. They have faith. Faith is the answer that renders the question irrelevant. Whether the galaxy is better served by that answer, or by a more honest one, is the thing that nobody, not the Templars, not the Inquisition, not the returned Primarch, is willing to find out. Somewhere in the galaxy, a Black Templars crusade fleet is moving toward the next war. The fleet is not large. A battle barge, a few strike cruisers, escort vessels, the transport ships that carry the crusade supplies, and the chapter keeps latest recruits. The warriors aboard are praying. They have been praying since the last war ended, and they will pray until the next one begins. And the prayers are not a prelude to the fighting, but a part of it, the spiritual component of the assault that the physical component will complete. The Marshal has received intelligence about a threat. Orcs, perhaps, or chaos cultists, or a Xenos incursion that the local garrison cannot handle. The intelligence has been processed. The chaplain has assessed the threat in theological terms. It is an affront to the Emperor, and the Emperor's warriors will address it. The Marshal has assessed the threat in military terms. It requires the Crusade's attention, and the Crusade's attention will be total. The warriors prepare. The neophytes check their weapons beside their initiates. The sword brethren sharpen blades that have been sharp for centuries. The ritual of preparation as important as the preparation itself. Somewhere in the fleet, a warrior who was ordinary yesterday is experiencing a vision that he did not seek and cannot refuse. The Emperor's hand on his mind, pointing him toward the enemy's champion, telling him that he is the one who must face it. He will become the Emperor's champion. He will take up the black sword. He will go forward into the heart of the enemy's strength. And he will fight the fight that the Emperor has chosen for him. The chains are being fastened. Initiates are binding their weapons to their wrists. The ritual of commitment that means, I am not leaving this fight. I am going forward. I am carrying the Emperor's will at the point of my blade, and I will not set it down until the work is done. This has been happening for 10,000 years, every day. In multiple places across the galaxy simultaneously. The details change, the enemy changes, the world changes, the warriors change as casualties thin the ranks and new recruits fill them. But the shape of the thing does not change. The prayer, the preparation, the vow, the charge, the killing, the prayer of thanks, the transit to the next war. Sigismund swore an oath that the crusade would never end. He has been dead for nearly 10,000 years, killed by the thing he hated most in a duel he could not win, and his body has been dust for millennia. But the oath is alive. The oath walks aboard the Eternal Crusader in the form of every High Marshal who has renewed it. The oath fights in the chainsword of every initiate who has sworn it. The oath prays in the litanies that every chaplain speaks over the warriors before the drop pods launch. The oath is the chapter. The chapter is the oath. Remove one and the other ceases to exist. Because the Black Templars without the Crusade are not the Black Templars. And the Crusade without the Black Templars is not the Crusade. They are one thing. They have always been one thing. The Imperium needs many kinds of warriors. It needs the defenders who hold the walls. It needs the thinkers who apply the Codex's principles with precision and restraint. It needs the specialists who understand the alien, the analysts who track the movements of chaos, the patient builders who fortify the worlds that the fighting has secured. And it needs the Black Templars, the ones who do not stop, the ones who carry the Emperor's name into the dark and who mean it when they scream it, the ones who have been fighting since the day they were founded and who will be fighting on the day the galaxy ends. Because the oath does not have a clause that says unless the galaxy ends. The galaxy may end. The crusade will not. That is the Black Templars' promise to the Emperor, and to themselves, and to the galaxy that does not always understand what they are, but that has relied on what they do for longer than most civilizations have existed. The fleet is moving. The prayers are spoken. The chains are fastened. The blades are drawn. The crusade continues. The crusade has always continued. And in the darkness between the stars, somewhere in the space between the last war and the next one, the Black Templars are coming. They are always coming.